1, 2.
Okay, yeah. All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's my greatest pleasure to welcome you to the 80th HKE birthday party. Yay! Yeah. No, this is... So, do we sing? We sing later, okay? We sing later. We sing at the coffee break. So this is actually part of a two-day event. Today's symposium focuses mainly on ergonomics and sleep research, and then tomorrow's inaugural lecture, which you also would all be invited, Professor Christie's inaugural lecture will focus on sports science and physical activity. And that's partly to not steal all her thunder for tomorrow, but also because otherwise we sit here until midnight, and that is not ergonomic, so we ain't going to do that. We're going to do this in decently regulated intervals. So it's my pleasure to tell you a little bit what happened in the first part of those 80 years. Because what happens in this department is it was founded, okay, in 1945. I guess you had worked that out, given that it's the 80th birthday party. But the department went through different phases, which usually were reflected in a change in name. It started as physical education, not even in this building. This building didn't exist anymore. Somewhere in the central campus, in a ward of the old military hospital, which also doesn't exist anymore, it's where now the psychology department is. And then after a one-year diploma course, it became a new building, it became a 3-year degree, moved into a BA, Bachelor of Arts in Phys Ed, and that all happened over a period of nearly the first 40 years. And then in 1983, the department became Human Movement Studies. And there were major changes where it became from Phys Ed more and more into sciences. Phys Ed pracs were replaced by scientific pracs, and the development took a bit further when in 1996 the department became Human Kinetics and Ergonomics. And I'm not going to tell you too much about this because I'm going to take away too much from the talks that come today. So today we're going to have different presenters which all are in one way or another related to the HKE department. And they're going to show us a bit how the different areas of research developed over the years as a reflection, as appropriate for an 80th birthday party. So we will have 4 talks about the history and the present, 2 talks before a break, 2 talks after a break. We do this the human-centered way. And after that, we have a Q&A session with all presenters, plus maybe others, to look into the future. So that's the idea for the afternoon. If you need a bathroom break in between, unfortunately you need to sneak out there, and from there you'll find science. But yeah, we'll open that up a bit more easily in the tea break. So the first talk for today is from Professor Andrew Thatcher, who is the president of the International Ergonomics Association. And he will talk about HKE and sustainable work in the future. So we start a bit with future before we reflect back. Professor Thatcher is a full professor at the University of Witwatersrand in Industrial and Organizational Psychology. He is the current president of the International Ergonomics Association. That's why we have him here. And he was a previous president of the Ergonomics Association of South Africa. And for all the students in the room, he is your external examiner. So, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind to tell us about sustainable work in the future in HKE.
And those of you who are watching the screen will probably notice that we're showing my presentation all the way through that. So there's nothing really very much more for me to say, other than I'm really happy to be here today, speaking to a bunch of students and also some HKE alumni, including some that you'll hear from this afternoon. So I don't know why this keeps jumping forward from one to the other. Luke, make it stop. It's probably because it's on a timer thing, so, so it's probably nothing that Luke can actually stop. Is this working? Ooh, yes. Do you mind if I speak without? Can you hear me if I speak with it? It actually might be louder.
But I'm not sure whether the people on the line...
Oh, the one online can't hear me. Okay, that's another way of doing this. There we go. Okay, that just makes it a bit easier than trying to look like I'm eating an ice cream or something worse. All right, so what I'm going to be talking about today, I've talked in a number of different places around the world on this stuff. And as Srancha said, it's a little bit sort of future thinking. But it was a project which was set up by the International Ergonomics Association to say, how do we prepare for what's coming? So one of the goals of the International Ergonomics Association is to have a future focus about what it is that we're looking at. And so for 3 years, I spent some time talking with people around the world, and I'll explain a little bit about what the things that sort of came out of that and what it means both for the world and what it means also here for South Africa. Good evening. And that'll teach them to come late. The interesting word that ended up getting thrown in there, so I just took the title as it was given to me, is sustainable work. Especially the stuff I've been writing about at the moment, I'm not actually sure that there's anything that's ever sustainable in the dictionary definition of sustainable. So it's because sustainability just means things are changing. When we talk about something being sustainable, we're talking about it not lasting forever, but lasting for a period of time until it needs to change again. Thank you very much for the slides for moving on. It'll give me a little bit of timing to this presentation. The starting point for looking at this is to say, it's just to look at what other people have said. And so this is just some examples about what people have looked at, about what the future of work might be. It starts off with the International Labour Organization's Centenary Initiative about what might be the future of work coming up. I've color-coded them, so the green ones are things that have something to do with sustainability and nature and climate change and all that sort of stuff. The blue stuff is usually something to do with business. Red stuff is definitely stuff about technology, and sort of, what would you call that? Aquamarine? No, it's not quite. Sort of light bluish one is about human-related stuff, so demographics of some sort, and the purple is just something that's different there. So in this slide, we look at the ILO stuff, we look at the UK Commission stuff, the Dill paper from 2012, anyone who's done ergonomics here will probably know of that paper, and then Bentley's research work, which he published back in 2021. The interesting thing is you start to see some trends. There's nearly always something about technology and how technology might change. There's nearly always something about climate change and the impact of the climate on what's going to happen coming forward. There's nearly always something about money, and there's nearly always something about some form of demographic shift. So that gives us a sort of a basis about what, and they're almost the same. So we wanted to try something just a little bit different from these types of exercises. And what we ended up doing was going around the world and hearing from people around the world about what their different types of challenges for the future might be in different places around the world. We structured it in such a way where we try to choose one expert who'd been working in the field for a long period of time, and one junior person who's just emerging, coming into that. Whether it was a practitioner or a researcher was very much up to the particular society in that area to decide what it is that was, who it is that they were going to talk about that. And then we asked them to do something to try to pick sort of 3 or 4 general trends, and we chose a thing which is called autobiographical thinking. In other words, don't try to think about what other people have said. Think about yourself. What are the challenges that you see going forward? The problem is if you ask people to say what will end up happening, you end up kind of getting this sort of chat GPT, generative AI stuff, where they just search and they give you a summary of what other people have found. We don't want that. We want you to know what you think, not what the computer thinks. So that's pretty much the exercise which we went through. Try to focus on a few small things rather than try to do the whole field. Try to be as detailed as possible in your descriptions about what it is that's going on, and to focus on the near future. And that's because if we start looking at things like when we talk about the future of work, what does that mean? What's the future of work going to be like in 100 years' time is a completely different question to be what is the future of work going to look like in 5 years' time. So we said just think about things that you can think about in the future, not something that might come up. We're not asking you to fantasize about what might end up happening, but what is possibly realistic in your mind about what are the types of things that would come out. I'll talk a little bit about causal loop diagrams a little bit later. So this is where we got the information. Each circle, the size of the circle doesn't make anything, it's just the size of the country. So a big circle means big country. And so you can see we got from pretty much most parts of the world. Russia we didn't ask for obvious reasons. Also because the Ergonomics Society there is no longer functional at the moment because of the types of issues which are happening in that part of the world. We are obviously missing huge big sections of the world. Africa, which makes up almost by 2050 will make up more than a third of the population of the world. Only has 2 representatives, one from Ghana, one from South Africa. Thanks, Andrew. And so we've got this sort of global look of things rather than just this sort of desktop type of exercise. And what do we come up with? Pretty much exactly the same thing. So while that exercise was quite interesting in going through and understanding what's happening in the world, we come up with the same types of issues, but, and this is where we start taking an ergonomics approach to understand what's going on here. We start seeing some really interesting things coming up when we start looking at things from an international perspective. The first of all, while there are large amounts of similarities, so issues around migration, for example, the causes and the consequences of them are different in different parts of the world. I gave this presentation in Mexico earlier this year, and you can imagine it was right on the Mexican border where we were sitting here. This issue of migration has completely different meanings depending on whether you are 1 meter to the north or 1 meter to the south, okay, when you're literally standing at the border. Okay, so yes, migration has an impact, but it has different impacts depending on where you are in the world. We have different causes which come up. In South Africa, the issue around migration has a different cause to the types of issues around migration going, for example, into North America, okay, or for that matter into Europe. They have similar types of causes to them, but they actually are fundamentally different. People come to South Africa, for example, on migratory because of issues around potential, okay, potential jobs. Now starting to irritate me. But at the same time, the problems are also related to one another. So while they might have different causes, the problems themselves are related to one another. So for example, when we start talking about the issue of, in for example, Europe has a problem because they have an aging population. They also have a problem because they have a large amount of migration. But now, here's where the problems start interrelating with one another. They have an aging population, which means they don't have enough people to do the work, but they have a large amount of migration of people coming through, especially from the Middle East, into who actually are there to be able to do the jobs. How are they solving that? Automation. So they're actually solving the wrong problem. Okay? They're solving the problem of not enough people by having automation when they actually have a lot of people coming in. They're just not the right, put that in inverted commas, the right people. So this actually is an issue then of, when we look at this a little bit more carefully, that's actually an issue of education, or at least skills development, not necessarily education, putting into that type of context. So what I've described so far is just one way in which we might understand that, but it's a really difficult way to present the data, to present the information. So we've been exploring a lot of different ways about a way in which we might represent what is actually happening, just to be able to demonstrate the interrelationships between things. Does anyone here, hands up, come across causal loop diagrams? Just need to know, there's a half a hand. Hi. All right, so not enough people in here that need, so maybe I just need to do a little bit of a background on a causal loop diagram. Okay, so the first thing around a causal loop diagram, so a causal loop diagram assumes that when we have two different components in a system, when we demonstrate a relationship between those two components, the relationship is causal. In other words, A causes B. And we can also represent that in different ways. So we can represent that as an enhancing relationship. In other words, when this happens, it makes that one bigger. Or we can represent it as an inhibiting relationship. When this happens, it makes that one smaller. Okay, so we have these positives and negatives. And then when we look at how it might circle back to the original point again, we can look at those as either being a reinforcing relationship. In other words, it goes all the way around and it just keeps on going all the way around, and what we might end up calling positive feedback. In nature, positive, this is as an example. In nature, positive feedback things are quite useful if you're in a growth phase. But if you don't have a balancing loop, which is now the opposite of that, if you don't have a balancing loop, they can get out of control. So something like human population growth is an example, at least the whole way through the 20th century, was an example of a reinforcing loop, which had the potential to get more and more out of control. And the way in which it was sort of balanced in certain parts of the area were things like China's one-child policy. That was one way in which it became a balancing force. Otherwise, we just end up with a sort of runaway population. It's the sort of thing which might, for example, happen in Africa. Africa by 2050, or certainly by 2060, will probably have 2 billion people. Okay, that's the same size as China and India combined across our continent. Unless we can find a way of balancing that, we're in for even more trouble. So we normally have these reinforcing loops and these balancing loops that we need to take into account. So here's an example of the data which we had, and drawing. It's a little bit too complicated to explain all of it, so I'm just going to give you some examples about some of the things which start coming out of here. The easiest way for me to start on this particular diagram is actually not with the technology stuff. This doesn't work. That's a good job it's here. And it's to actually start with not to start with the technology, which is generally where ergonomists start off with, but actually to start with the people. It's the skills availability. So towards the top third in the middle, since I don't have a pointer. Okay. I think Andrew dropped it on the floor. Hey. Yeah. Something about tools, but I can't remember what the bits in between are. Okay, so the point, there we go. All right, so skills availability is over here. Generally what we end up finding somewhere around the world is when we talk about scales availability, so we have this type of reinforcing loop. It has a negative impact on a weak education system. So we can present these in all sorts of different ways. So it has a negative impact on a weak education system, or in other words, a positive impact on a strong education system. But in order to represent it, it's easier just to represent this in the negative, which leads to education, which leads to skills availability, and hopefully you get this little reinforcing loop that happens here. On the other side, we have this sort of, we have a different type of reinforcing loop that ends up happening, and it's the sort of reinforcing loop that we find in South Africa. In other words, where you don't have skills availability, or sorry, where you do have skills availability, it has a negative impact on job opportunity losses, which then has a negative impact on, wow, that was quite a jump. Okay, there we go. Which has okay, it's now gone, which has a positive impact on formal unemployment. Again, we have this reinforcing loop which sort of comes around and prevents, in South Africa's case, would prevent this sort of loss of it to things like informal economy. Skill availability also has a positive impact on the introduction of technology, but it has a whole load of other things which also impact on it. Again, I'm not going to go into this in a great deal of detail, other than to say that we can map these things out using ergonomics methods to understand the interrelationships between these different types of components. In fact, what we've done is, if you look in this one over here, it's actually mapped out the 4 things which I showed you a little bit earlier. Skills availability, introduction of technology, climate change impacts, and informality, which sits up over here. So those are the 4 different aspects. But here what we've done is we've shown how they're interrelated with one another. But we don't only have to do that at a global level, we can also do that at a national level. So we can show the same type of relationship at the, let's say at the South African level. We're in South Africa, so I might as well use a South African example. And so what we have are things like high rate of unemployment, a large and growing informal sector, the things that we need to look at. We have a large available workforce, but usually their technical skills are really low. So our problem over here is not that we don't have enough people to do the work, is that we don't have enough work for the people that we have, because of the types of skills that they have, not because we don't have work for them, but because their skill level doesn't match the type of work which we need. We have a weak education and training system, which is not actually preparing people for that, a weak healthcare system, I'll get into that just now, and an unreliable public energy system, which actually turns out to be one of the ways in which we can help ourselves here. So this is the same causal loop diagram, but now only for South Africa, so it's slightly simpler than the one that we were looking at before. The thing I wanted to show was what's happening down over here. Okay, so what we do is we have introduction of technology, but now when we introduce technology, that has a negative impact through energy demand, has an impact on climate change impacts. But what's happening in South Africa is because we have such poor technology introduction, we're actually having a positive impact on climate change, because what's ending up happening is we are not actually using technology as much as we should do, so we're actually having a positive impact on our environment around us. And what that does mean, though, is that we're at a stage where if we start introducing new technologies, we can do that in a way which actually creates a big positive reinforcement loop here, which can also be for job creation, if we go to renewable energy and not the old energy systems. But here's, I'm glad it's actually, maybe it's just happy we slipped onto this slide. Here's an example of that when it comes to the skills base. What's wrong with that picture? I'll give you a clue. The sun. Yes. They're all facing in different directions. Anyone who's been on our planet for their life will know that the sun doesn't shine in all 4 directions. Okay? We're in the southern hemisphere, which means the sun predominantly shines from the north. Well done, guys. You're awake. All right. In this particular slide over here, you can see where north is because of the shadows. North is somewhere out over there. Okay, this one's actually facing entirely the wrong direction. It's facing south. This one's facing somewhere off to the west, and this one's facing somewhere off to the east. But what we do is we have a particular problem over here in that, by not training people about how to do this, we're installing systems which, excuse my French, oh shit, okay. They're not designed to do the types of things which they need to do, and we need to solve that problem through training. So to be able to get people to understand exactly how it is we're supposed to be installing this. For those of you who've been on a research project, this is actually really close to Soswetla, where we've been doing some other work. And while I was doing that other work, I saw this picture and thought, how stupid are people? Clearly very. So this is sort of the way in which we're sort of looking at these particular problems, and the way in which we'd use those causal loop diagrams is to look at where might we find opportunities for growth. And it's not the only one in that causal loop diagram, but it is one of the places. But it does mean that we need to get rid of our addiction to coal. In each of these areas, we can also start mapping out what are the different types of ergonomics and human factors implications. So the types of things which we could be doing when it comes to labor market supplies, or things like workplace accommodations, work scheduling designs, to make sure that we're able to include more people in the workplace. It is about understanding something about decent work, and especially decent work across supply chains. Now, when we're talking about things that are from a global perspective, lots of things, these are the things which we easily come up with, are the technology ones, just purely about how it is that we're trained. This one over here is quite interesting, the informalization, because there's actually two different types of informalization here. The one which we see in South Africa is the informalization which is happening because of the informal economy. In other words, there's not enough people are being employed in the formal economy, people are then stepping into the informal economy, and therefore we need to start looking at how we might support people in those types of environments. But there's another type of informalization which is happening somewhere in the world, and that has got to do with the issue of the informal, is about informal contracts. You probably have heard about these things, so it would be including things like gig work. You've heard of gig work. Hands up if you've heard of that. Gig work, 0-hour contracts. Well done. You just put your hand up. 0-hour contracts are basically essentially what McDonald's works on a 0-hour contract. I'm not sure, it's not legal in South Africa, so not in South Africa, but in places like the United States. Essentially what they do is they say, we'll employ you, so you'll be a formal employee with us, and we'll tell you when you need to work, whenever that might be. So they don't contract you to have any hours across a whole month. So you might go for a whole month, be employed by McDonald's, and never get a single cent from them. So there are these types of informalizations of the work contract. And that's usually what we have, is we have an imbalance in our system where the employers have an imbalance compared to the employees. And we start seeing these types of exploitative types of relationships happening. And then with any good piece of research, we also think about all the things that we haven't done. And so what we can see is that taking a systems approach helps us to see things which are not always obvious to be able to see there, but really obvious when you tell people about them. So it's pretty much what we do in ergonomics. It sounds like common sense when you tell people that, but it's not common sense because people don't normally come up with those types of things. So it is about trying to understand and using the tools which we have developed to try to understand that. The difficult problem which we have is I have no idea which future that represents. And that's not because we didn't think about that, it's because we don't know how quickly things will change. Okay, so I can't tell you whether that'll be 5, 10, 15, 20, or 30 years from now, but I can tell you that these are things which will happen. But of course, there are a whole lot of other things which also get in the way. We don't know about timing, we don't know about the contents, and we don't know about things like black swan events. Anyone heard about black swan events? No one's heard of it? Some people have heard about it. Candace, tell us about black swan events. Sorry, there? He's a black swan.
That's what I remember from his teaching.
From black swan events. Black swan events. Okay, so essentially what ends up happening, the black swan event is something which we say it's so rare that we don't think that it'll happen. There was a black swan event in Texas, for example, a week and a half ago on the 4th of July. It was so rare that people didn't think it would happen, and 200 people died. Okay. COVID is another example of a black swan event. We knew that a pandemic was coming, but we thought it would be so rare that we never thought it would come now. Okay? Now, the problem with black swan events is they completely change the way in which things will happen. Black swan events, for the COVID black swan event, for example, rapidly changed. We're already slowly moving towards working from home, online types of meetings and things. Then this event comes along and suddenly this change happens really rapidly. And then it's difficult to get people back into, for example, a classroom again, because they'll want to sit at home in their pajamas and listen to lectures. You guys all here, so you know you were talking about other people. The other thing is that, and this is probably my last point that I'm going to make on here, is that systems tools can help us see something, but they don't necessarily give us an answer about how do we get there. So I can see the advantage of going towards renewable energy systems in South Africa and the types of job creation, provided we have the right types of training. But I don't know how to get there. I don't know how to, for example, convince thousands of people, including the government, that this is a proper way in which we might move in that particular direction, particularly when we have all sorts of other competing interests, like, for example, the coal lobby. And all the jobs which might be lost in the coal lobby because of that. So we still have these intractable problems which we need to kind of get away with. And then, of course, my last slide, which now it won't go to, is just some useful links, because I'm here representing the International Ergonomics Association. There's some things that you can do. The news briefs is done by Abigail. I can't see where you are. Where are you? There we go. Is actually helped put together by Abigail, but we also have some other ways in which you can connect with us. To get the news briefs, you don't actually have to wait for your ESSA president to send the material to you. ESSA president, put up your hand. You can actually go onto the website and you can actually register for that, and it'll send it directly to you. You don't have to wait for someone to send it to you. Otherwise, we also have a whole range of all our webinars are on YouTube. There's probably 40 or 50 of those on various different subjects around the world, and they're all freely available to everyone. I'll stop. Do we just talk, or do you want questions?
Okay. No, we do have questions,
okay.
But we need a microphone for that, for the people who are actually not in the room. Okay, this is on. So we have a few minutes for questions for Andrew about his presentation.
Is that my lunch? Not too many. My lunch is outside. Andrew. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not sure why you skipped your very last point on that slide, because I actually think it might be at the crux of what you're talking about. And perhaps just for you to comment on value-free science, reductionist hypothesis testing, shift to value-laden versus this finance-driven. Because I think if you think, when you made that comment about our addiction to coal, what currently is happening in America in terms of reduction in solar, wind, and re-emphasis on tax reliefs for oil and coal. Your thoughts around that, please?
Yes, that's an interesting question. So just to go over what Andrew said quickly. So the idea is that because something is scientific, it's therefore doesn't have any. It's therefore value free. Is the assumption that we make. In other words, we do this not because we study these questions not because we are trying to feed into some particular type of ideology. We do it because it's the right thing to do. That's just bullshit. every question that you ask is value laden. The types of questions that you ask are determined by the values that you hold, or they are determined by the values, the things that you value. You will study something because there is finance there to finance that study, for example. The problem with, but there's a problem now if you go to what is value-driven science or value-driven investigations of things. The question then becomes whose values? It's all right acknowledging that you have values, but then the question becomes whose values are you then prioritizing? So when I talk about valuing renewables over coal, I'm valuing something which is a future-oriented approach versus a now. How am I going to feed myself now? So for someone working in the coal industry, that value is, I need to go home and tell my family that they have some food on their plate tonight, not that some other family sometime in the future is going to be able to put food on their plate. So I suppose that the question is acknowledging that these are really difficult problems, not to turn around and say that, that's why I said like value-free science is bullshit. There's no such thing. You've made a choice. By saying that you choose to call it value-free, you've already placed your values on it. So I think it's just acknowledging that there's going to be, as we transition, there's going to be winners and losers, and you need to find ways of helping those losers to move forward.
Thank you. Now, I have no mic left, so I'm just going to project my voice. But we have time for one more question.
Put it back.
We can swap that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can have your own one. I'll hold it.
All right. We
No
have
more
time
questions.
for one more question. Okay. I won't let you out that. I still have one. And if nobody in the room asks one, I'll ask my question.
Go for it.
And so my first observation in the first slide that you had was that aging population appeared in all of those papers. But in what you showed in the end, my first thought was actually South Africa doesn't really have an aging population problem. South Africa has a problem that a generation is missing, in a way. So, and in that thing, I didn't quite find, the aging workforce is still there.
Yeah.
What do we expect with the labor force in South Africa? Because it's going to be a step from no aging population to aging population.
So, I mean, the first thing to show is that when we move from the world picture to a South African picture, the aging workforce doesn't appear there in the South African context. And that's a variety of different reasons. The first reason is, as quite rightly what you've pointed out, is that when it comes to the demographic situation, if you look at the demographic chart of South Africa, it's bottom heavy. We have a lot more youth than we have aging people. Now, part of that, of course, is related to the healthcare system. Okay, when you have a weak healthcare system, you don't have an aging population because they die. Simple kind of fact. Or if they survive, if they survive to old age, then they're not working anymore for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there aren't enough jobs for everyone in there, or they're forced into retirement. Or in the case of South Africa, many people are forced into immigration. Okay, so they will actually leave the country rather than be. So in the South African situation, you don't actually see that aging workforce issue, not as much as what you would find in places, let's say, for example, like Korea. Now, Korea, you have a different type of situation in that you can't emigrate because of the issue of language. The only place in the world which speaks Korean is Korea. So if you were to emigrate, you then have other types of language issues which make it a little bit difficult to kind of move to different types of places. We have a similar situation in South Africa, for example. The people who are emigrating in South Africa are not the Xhosa-speaking people or the Zulu-speaking people. They are the English-speaking people. So in certain, for example, portions in South Africa, you actually do have an aging population. Provided again that you have where you also have a strong healthcare system that enables them to reach old age. So we have these types of things which are going. So, I mean, just when we're talking over here, it actually shows you there is another place where we have growth in South Africa, and that's with our healthcare system. Improve the healthcare system, and suddenly you will have, first of all, a whole lot of jobs and job creation that goes along with improving the healthcare system, but also improving outcomes, health outcomes for other people, bringing people to old age by creating another problem, which will then be an aging workforce, which we'll then have to tackle. So that, I mean, that's part of what I'm trying to show in the sort of systems thing. There's no such thing as a sustainable workforce. Solving one problem creates another problem somewhere down the line. And really what we're doing as human beings is just solving all the little problems as they come along.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll take this as a final word of the day, word of your talk. Thank you very much. Andrew? Okay. While Smar's getting ready for her talk, I have a request that we move a little bit further this way, because there are people outside the door who can't come in because there's no spaces close at the door. Future presenters are exempted from this, but if we could just make sure that we leave the corner spaces free for people, it'll make life a bit easier. It's also good to stay physically but active during your presentation. Okay.
I hope your slides don't jump. So do you want to... Where should we put it?
Okay. Okay. Cool. We'll do that. Okay. So, while Smar's getting ready to give her talk, I'll tell you a little bit about Smart. Shake it. So, it's not working.
No, I can't get it. I know what. Hang on. No, we got it. Upside down.
Well, great. Okay, if you could not stand so far over that you step into that camera line.
Okay.
That causes a bit of a problem. All right. Our next presenter is Sma Gamotukulula, and she is the current president of ESSA. In case you were interested. She is a Rhoton HKE graduate with MSc with distinction, and she's the managing director of Human Factors and Ergonomics specialist at Smart Ergonomics since 2018. I had to look it up.
Yes, 7 years tomorrow.
So, sorry?
7 years tomorrow.
7 years tomorrow, so it's another birthday. She's also a certified professional ergonomist. And Sma, we are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you. Good afternoon. See, I should stick to my languages. Molweni, Sanbonani. Aibo guys, Sanbonani, Molweni. Oh my goodness. I thought since we've got a room full of young people, there'd be some energy. But your energy levels are as low as us 40-year-olds. But anyway, it's so good to be back to HKE. It is an absolute honor to be here amongst some of the greatest in our field in this country. Hi, June. Hi, Phil. Hadn't seen you. I'm actually really humbled, and I'm so grateful that HKE has invited me to be a part of this. I know I'm here for ESSA, but I can't help separate my role as ESSA and my role as an ex-alumni with some unfinished business in HKE. Being here takes me back to 2003, where I used to sit right there where Belinda is, in this very lecture theater when I did my first year. So it's really good to be here, especially with Prof. Scott being here. And I know I've told this to Miriam and a couple of other people, but the reason why it's so special is because she's the reason why I was really convinced at some point in my third year that this was the discipline that I want to go into. So fast track from 2005, when I was in my third year, to 2025, when I am here to represent ESSA in this very important discussion about human factors and ergonomics in South Africa. And I must indicate that the opinions that are shared, disclaimer, the opinions that are shared, that are going to be shared today are based on what we have seen as ESSA, our priority areas as ESSA, and also personally as a professional that has been practicing in South Africa for a good number of years. So I'm hoping it's going to generate some discussion. It's going to, put on some hints in some of you who are still not yet decided if you want to do HKE or HFE in the future, because we certainly need more people who are going to stay in the discipline. All right, let's get started. So the title of my presentation is Human Factors and Ergonomics in South Africa. And it's basically asking, where are we at? Where are we at in relation to 40 years ago when the society was established in 1985? And also, I think, where are we at in the context of the HKE department and the role that this department has played in where human factors and ergonomics is in South Africa and across the continent and even internationally? You are welcome to ask questions as we go along, by the way. It's not going to be a formal presentation. It would be amiss for me to even start this presentation if I didn't do some punting for my favorite society in the world, which is the Ergonomic Society of South Africa. Put your hands up if you're a member of ESSA. Okay, I'm hoping by the end of today, some of you will go, especially if you're a student. The price is so low. How much is it again? 150 rands, guys. One pizza, and you can become a member of ESSA. And the value you're gonna get is worth way more than a little pizza that's gonna add a few calories into your system. So please do become a member of ESSA. You are a captive audience, and so I'm hoping that the presentation today is gonna resonate with you so you can see the value of participating in the community that is really driving the agenda about human factors and ergonomics in the country. So who are we? ESSA is basically a representative professional body or society of human factors and ergonomics professionals and individuals that are interested in human factors and ergonomics in the country, Southern Africa, and even the rest of the continent. So that means that if you are interested in HFE, this is the place to be. There's no other in the country that will be able to represent your interest as a human factors individual. We were established in 1985, so ESSA is like Untanga. You guys know Untanga, ne? Untanga is peer, our peer. So it's actually a bit weird that I am speaking about a society that was formed when I was literally just how old am I turning this year? 1983? 41? No, 42. How am I? When I was I was 2 years old when this society was formed, and here I am today being able to have a career in a discipline that is still not as widely known as it should be. So it really is, it's like I said, it's wild, when I think about where I am and what's happening in the lecture room today. So this year is our 40th anniversary. So we are hoping that when we have our conference later in the year, we're going to be commemorating the 40th, as well as maybe getting more of you to participate in ESSA as we move along. We also a federated society of the International Ergonomics Association, and we have been since 1994. So while they were busy going through transitions, democracy, we were still saying, hey, internationally, here we are. And I think that was, it took a lot of foresight back then when the country didn't really know much about ergonomics to actually make a decision to say, we need to play at an international stage. And the decision that was made back then is bearing fruits to this day and will continue for years to come. And some of the people that were key in that, Prof. Scott and many others, are here in the room today. We are also the only society professional body in the country that will certify you, legitimately so, as a human factors and ergonomics professional in the country. So some of you here, I'm hoping, will become HFE specialists, and if you want to become a distinguished professional where you have gone through a professional affairs board and certification processes, ESSA is the one who's going to be able to do that for you. And of course, I must indicate that our certification process has been endorsed by the International Ergonomics Association, one of only 5 or 6 now in the whole world. In the whole world. And this is part of the reason why we have a lot of students who have come from HKE specifically, especially the postgrad levels, who have gone on to either be certified here and gone internationally, and their certification is recognized there. That's a big deal, guys. We are small, but we play large. We play in the international stages. So thank you to the PAB, Miriam, where's Miriam? Who's our current chair, and many other professionals, including Candice, including Svansha, and even Prof. Thatcher, who were part of the PAB and established it for our good and for us to bear the fruits of that even to this day. And of course, we're also a member of the network called Ergo Africa, which the Toddles and Thatchers and Johnnos of this world have been a very critical part of establishing. So ESSA is here for you. There comes my marketing gimmick. ESSA is here for you. I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you will understand a little bit more about ESSA, but please go to our website so that you can find out a little bit more about what we are doing. Okay, and I won't go into a lot of detail here because I've already punted ESSA quite a bit, but if you want to know what we're really about, that's part of our mandate, and we're really about advocacy, creating awareness, supporting developmental goals in terms of making sure we provide platforms for you to participate in conferences, symposia, and by the way, we already have another series coming up starting next week, 3 webinars that are coming up that you can really learn from. And of course, we are very big on making sure that certification of professionals is out there because we take this really seriously. There's a lot of people out there who are pretending to be human factors and ergonomics specialists, and those who get certified definitely get an extra star to say someone else has verified that you're the real deal. So please, if you haven't done so, do we have honors groups, honors students in here? End of honors, you can go and get certified. Do we have master's students here? Second year masters? End of your masters, you can go and get certified as the in training. You don't need to wait until you go and get work, right? And I'm hoping, and hint, hint, HKE, HOD, is that we can get to a point where as soon as you graduate, you get your application in, because we really need more and more people who have the actual qualifications that we need to be certified. So if you are not thinking about it yet, please don't wait until you get work experience. All right, so getting into the topic for today, there are 3 main areas that I want us to have a discussion on. And it's a conversation. It's not going to be very academic. It's just going to be talking about certain aspects of where we have been and where we are at when it comes to the development and implementation of human factors in the country. So the first area that I want us to talk about is the recognition of the HFE discipline. So HKE is 80 years old. Of course, we know that the field of human factors and ergonomics predates the 80 years. In South Africa, and even on the continent at large, human factors and ergonomics, we are a little bit of late bloomers, I must indicate. And for years, we've kept saying, oh, we're still in an infancy, blah, blah, blah. In Amanje, we're still infancy when it comes to certain aspects. But compared to maybe when I was in the first year, there's a lot that has been done to try and move us away from the infancy levels to an area where we can really punch above our weight. But in terms of recognition of the HFE discipline, where are we at right now? Firstly, there are a lot more people, a lot more industries, a lot more government departments, a lot more organizations that now even know what human factors and ergonomics is, whereas in the past, it was crazy. I still, to this day, get corrected. People think my Zulu accent is really thick when I say I'm doing ergonomics. They think, oh, do you mean economics? So you still get those kinds of people, but I promise you, compared to, and I'm going to sound like the older people, but compared to back then, there's a lot more people who understand what it is, and a lot of it is really linked to the legislation that has been pushed since, a couple of, maybe a decade or 2 ago. And so I think we must recognize that where we are at now is that we definitely have a lot of backing from the legislative point of view, and companies are really interested in complying to legislation. And so whenever you're going to have legislation that is saying implement ergonomics, manage ergonomic risks, it means that it makes your job easier because you don't need to convince them that they need to do it as much as you would have if the legislation wasn't there. So kudos to a lot of people in this room, once again, who were part of the task teams that were part of the development of the legislation. And in fact, if you look at the different industries and the different regulators in the country, there is no industry currently, except maybe military, but they also recognize ergonomics. There's no industry in the country where ergonomics is not legislated. Not one. Right? That's a big deal. That's a real big deal. When we're looking at buy-in and looking at getting companies to buy into doing ergonomics, that's one of the biggest factors that you will be able to use to convince them. So keep that in mind. It's on your side. If we look at professionalization, I've said that we've got a certified, we've got a PAB, which certifies professionals, and in terms of recognition, that certification and that endorsement from the IEA is a big deal, which is going to be to your advantage if you get certified. Back then, we didn't have a PAB that did certifications. So a lot has been done to make sure that we're at a point where there's an internationally recognized certification system. That's a big deal. And so if we look at where are we at, we are literally on par with a lot of other societies in the world who are able to credibly certify human factors and ergonomics professionals. If we look at other cognate disciplines, do they even recognize us and our existence? Cognate disciplines, you all know what those are, ne? So basically other disciplines like health and safety, the risk people, the industrial engineers in general, my not so favorite people, except for Svantia. And Prof. Scott, Prof. Google. I fight a lot with engineers in my line of work, that's why they're not my faves. But in any case, if you look at all the other cognate disciplines, in the past, they didn't even recognize which there's a discipline called HFE. Maybe some here and there, like individuals, but if we look at where we're at now, we've got MOUs, as ESSA anyway, we've got MOUs with organizers, societies such as the SIOSH, so the occupational hygienists, the health and safety people, and we're still looking at other professional bodies like your OTASAs and whatnot, because all of those people, all of those professions, believe that they are the ones who must be implementing ergonomics. So what that means is that they recognize that there's this discipline called HFE, but they believe that they are the ones who must implement it, not you who are studying the thing. And of course, we advocate that everyone has a part to play. We need to work together. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of scope creep that is happening, where people with the qualifications that you guys have are not the ones who are taking the lead in certain aspects when the scope is at, is more complex and requires someone with the in-depth understanding of human factors and ergonomics. So cognate disciplines recognize us. They understand the value of HFE. So if you're just sleeping, thinking, it's not an important thing, you're gonna be left on the sidelines. So that recognition is there, not just internally as people that are already buying into this discipline, but it's there even for others who are outside of our discipline. And we need to find ways that we can collaborate more. And I think that's one of the areas where we haven't done very well in the past. And we're hoping that as we move into the future, and as more and more of you are moving into working with cognate disciplines, that there's going to be a lot more collaboration happening there. And then also, if we look at where are we at in terms of local and continental participation, there's a lot that has been done here as well. In the past, we used to have maybe just Prof. Scott participating outside the country when it comes to ergonomics. But now, as more and more people have become experienced, and as they have established wider networks, we are having a lot of collaboration, working together with other parts of the country as well as around the continent, which is why we have the network Ergo Africa as well, where there's a lot of collaboration happening there. That wasn't happening in the past. So the people that are started the conversations back then. I hope you're proud, because the agenda is still being driven, where we are recognizing that it's not just about South Africa moving forward when it comes to HFE, but we need to make sure that the entire continent, which is more even in its infancy when it comes to HFE than we might be, needs us to also participate at that level. Internationally, there's also been a lot of participation that's happened. Back in the day, Prof. Scott, once again, was one of the, in fact, was probably the only one, was participating at IEA level. But I think last year we had 3 of you guys. Yeah, so the 2, Andrews, Jono, were all in the executive of the IEA. That's a big deal, guys. Do you know IEA? Do you know IEA? Nina, you don't know. So at that level, going from maybe 2 decades ago where maybe only one individual, which was Prof. Scott, was participating at international level at the highest level of our professional bodies. Now we've got more than one. And on top of it, the president, the Makoya, is part of the Ergonomics Society of South Africa. Well done, Thatcher. So I think this says a lot about the recognition of the HFE discipline. Back in the day, most of these things, we could not have checked those boxes. And once again, I think it's the wisdom of those who were back then taking the charge and saying, we need to not play small. We need to be able to link up internationally. And that's why it's so much easier for us to participate at that level. Next, this one is going to be a touchy one for some people. Growth in terms of professional development. I think this is important. So it's not enough just to get recognized. We need to be able to get the right people trained, capacitated well enough so that they can go out and implement this thing called HFE. And so the development of the profession and the professionals who are going to be doing the work is a very important topic. So the first one, number of HFE professionals in the country. I can't even tell you back in the day how many. I knew most of the HFE professionals in the country in my first year. And it was the people in the department, so that was 5 people, as well as Cindy from NIOH, Jan Reno from Ergotech, and now I'm going to forget, Jen James, who was working in agriculture. In the whole country, I knew 8 people in my first year that had done this thing. Now, we are sitting with so many more. And you know where most of those HFE professionals are being groomed? Right here. If you go to the ESSA website and you look for the CPE, CEA list, those who are certified professionals, you will find that there are 25 certified professional ergonomists. That's the higher level of certification. 19 of those, what's the percentage? Calculate for me. 19 out of 25, what's that percentage? Those are all HKE people. So you guys have such an advantage. I don't even think you realize it. And if you don't, because say, I don't know how else I'm going to make you realize it. I don't think you realize the advantage that you have being here. I say this from experience, and I say this having hired people who came from this department. You have such an advantage. And I hope you really, really take full advantage of the opportunity that you have to be here, to be taught in this department. Don't take it for granted. But if we look at the number of HFE professionals, where we're at now, there's a whole host of people that are regarding themselves and who are practicing as human factors and ergonomics professionals. Of course, some of them are not really the real deal. But don't say that I said that. A lot of people are not really, they pretend that they can do this, but we see some of the reports that come through, they don't really have the background into what ergonomics and human factors is. And so you guys are at an advantage when it comes to that. And we hope that most of you are not going to go the sports route, Candace, that you're going to go the HFE route. In the past, when we were in the department, there used to be a lot of people who were just, it was all sports. And I mean, I felt so out of place here, I must say. I felt so out of place because I'm not very sporty. The only thing that I played was netball and maybe basketball. but I wasn't ever intending to be a sports person. So I would feel out of place in this room. But there were already seeds that were being planted to say, there's this other side. And I'm very happy to see that over the years, we've slowly turned the dial, and I hope we turn it even more so that we can have more and more people going out there to increase the number. Yes, Prof. Scott. She gets it, you know, she converted us, so now I'm here to convert the rest. All right, also the number of institutions involved in training HFE professionals. For the most, I think for the last 2 decades that I've been aware of anyway, the people or the institutions that have been training HFE professionals, mainly who? Rhodes. Now we've got Forte, we've got Stellenbosch, we've got WITS as well from the systems side of things. But if you want to learn about HFE, this is the place to be mostly. In the past, I think Cape Town University, UCT, yes, had a module, nyana, not a full course, not all the way to PhD level. So please, I know a lot of people are like, oh, we're so sick of Grahamstown. I was too, okay? But if you really want to be able to develop further and learn and get a comprehensive qualification by the time you get out, stick it out, even with the problems with water and the potholes, because in the long run, you will thank yourself. Transformation, and I'm not bringing this up because I'm black, right? This is important. When I was in first year, once again, I'm going back to when I was young, back in our day, in our first year class, there were 3 black students. 3 black students. Now I look, I'm like, how am I? There's so many people that are not of one race only, because HFE is not just about a certain race, and I'm so happy to see the room looking the way it is. I know that in a lot of cases, people will say, you know, you're just pushing the transformation agenda. It matters. When you are out, I mean, just last week, I was out at a mine. We're doing assessments. The people there could not speak English, right? They could not speak Afrikaans. It matters that I was the one who was doing the assessment and I could converse with them. They could tell me about their work in a way that someone who might not be able to speak the language, who might not be able to understand that they're coming from the township, they have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to travel all the way to work, and by the time they get to work, it's been 3 hours of being awake, and therefore their fatigue management system in that company is probably just up. It matters, okay? When it comes to transformation, we have a lot better representation, and I'm very happy to say this because it's something that I'm really have seen changing over time. And I know, for example, HKE, they'll say, it's the most untransformed department because of the, the profile of the lecturers. And I always rebut that and I say, they might still have to do some work in terms of that, but this department has created the transformation out there. Unfortunately, the metrics that they use probably don't recognize that, and I don't want the HK department to ever get disheartened. The transformation that is happening out there started in here. The environment was made to be a more enabling environment for us who felt different, to feel like, yes, I can stay here, I can make this a career. I don't need to quickly go out after my 3rd year. This is a place where I can be able to learn and develop. So this is very important. Like I said, I know some people out there might not be happy about this, but this is really important. So please, this is also not to say that if you're not black, you mustn't stay. Please do stay. Because we need everyone. Everyone has a role to play. Anyway, let's move on. HFE training outside university. So most of the training we have at postgrad level, undergrad level, is at universities. But we have a big problem, a big risk that SA is trying to figure out how we're going to sort it out now. So if you don't get your education within a university, you want to get it from training institutions outside, right? The issue is that currently, with all the changes that have happened with the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations, we have not been able to take all the old unit standards and make them available to be accredited. So what that means is there aren't any recognized courses or skills programs outside of university. So you guys are not having that problem yet, but I think it's also, if you look at it the other way around, it's an advantage because you are the ones who they are looking for when it comes to qualifications that are recognized. this university is giving you those. So it already sets you apart, so don't forget that. The last area I want us to talk about very quickly is the implementation across industries. The whole reason why we're in this career is because we want to achieve world domination. I'm joking. We want to achieve widespread implementation, understanding of human factors and ergonomics. Not just in South Africa. I know in SA I keep punting this thing. Across the continent. Do you know how much untapped potential there is in this continent when it comes to HFE? There are a lot of, and you might have seen them, debates about, oh, the future of HFE is dead. Don't mind them. In Africa, we still have many decades where we can be saying we can make a meaningful contribution using our skills within the HFE discipline. Even with the changes that are happening with our AI and the robots taking over, we can still make a huge contribution there. So when it comes to the implementation requirements, implementation across industries on the continent, we are seeing that there's more and more industries that are implementing HFE. Back in the day, it used to be automotive, agriculture. With Candice and your research, I remember, we used to have a bit of mining as well as military. Those are the main ones. Now every single industry that I have come across has started recognizing and actually implementing ergonomics. And the reason why that's possible is because we've got more of you going out there to get the jobs in those places. So please, whenever you are thinking about where can you do your work, just realize that anywhere, and this is what Prof. Scott used to say, anywhere where there is a person doing work, you can have a job. Haibo. Do you understand what that means? The legislation even goes as far as even saying in people's homes, where you've got domestic workers, you've got a job. Yeah. Underground, you've got a job. In the mines, you've got a job. Hey, but guys, you realize the impact of it means that we just need to be creative about how we create an understanding of the value we bring to the different areas where people are doing work. So I know that some people say, oh, where am I going to work? And I used to ask that question. My parents used to be like, hey, Smile, you're still there. Are you going to get a job? Where are you going to work? But the jobs are there. We just need to do a better job of making everyone aware where they are. Scope of implementation is definitely widened. Before, and even now, if you look at the cognitive disciplines, they all just want to do risk assessments. And fine, you can do risk assessments, but realize that the tide is shifting. People are recognizing that safety management systems and the application of human factors and ergonomics within systems is where it's at. So please don't box yourself and try and fight for the pie where people are going for risk assessments. There's so much more. Like, I do investigations, I develop legislation, and many others in this discipline across the country are doing way more than just risk assessments. Please remember that. Risk assessments is here, and this is where we can make a contribution. And I'm not saying risk assessments are not important, but just think wider than that. Safety critical industries, of course, we've seen that they're the ones who are most likely to be implementing ergonomics, and usually it's because of compliance-driven approaches and pressure from regulatory bodies. But what we know is that anywhere where there's a person doing a job, what does that mean? You have a job. Literally, anywhere where there's a person, whether it's safety critical or not, you can be able to make a positive contribution to improve that person's work, improve their health, their safety, productivity, performance, and all of that. So, before I close off, the title of the presentation was Human Factors and Ergonomics in South Africa, Where Are We At? I think it's important to reflect and see where did we start, because you can really see a lot has been done. And a lot of that lot came from people that are in this room, in this department. And so when you as HKE are celebrating 80 years, I hope everyone recognizes that that is 80 years of contributing to the development of HFE in the country as well as across the continent and even internationally. So I hope that you're all going to join ESSA if you have not yet done so, and that you will also, if you're still sitting on the edge, not sure if you want to go HKE or sports, that you're going to come to the fun side, which is the HFE side. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.
Stay here for one more question, all right? Okay.
Oh, Prof. Scott.
We don't need to say any more. She's done it.
Thank you.
And we are very, very proud of you.
Yabonga. Thank you so much, Prof.
Okay? We have time for one more question. You may.
And I think I think it's a serious question. When you completed your master's in ergo what? Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think you would end up in your position now?
No. I was hopeful, but I was still not sure what would happen. I was still not sure if I would get gainful employment and be able to sustain myself, because that was a big issue at the time. But I think if I look at where the discipline has taken me while I was a student and even outside, way beyond what I thought it would be.
But where did it come from? Deep inside. She took whatever we gave her, she seemed to think it was quite good.
Oh yeah.
She took that and ran with it. Don't think anybody's waiting for you to come for a job, darling. Okay. You got to get out there and work for it like she has. You're a gem.
Thank you, Prof.
We have a tea break now, and I'm not sure how we're going to work this. Can we open this door, or does everybody have to go outside? Okay, so we will open this side and we'll be back at 5 minutes 35, 15:35.
You need to come back because you need to sign the register.
Okay, I'll try my best. Yeah, right. I'm not good at that.
And it is amazing. I used to speak internationally, and
You can grab her later. She has to come talk now.
I showed my friend the size that we're Where must it take?
Yeah.
Where I want to be.
Yes, bring your water this side.
Nervous.
Welcome back.
Yeah, do you want space here?
The second half of it
There you
will
go.
be a really special afternoon of celebration. The next presentation is a tag team presentation. HKE contributions to ergonomics in South Africa. We have two presenters. The one is Professor Pat Scott, which for a long, long time was actually the face of HKE. Face of HKE at Rhodes, the face of ergonomics in South Africa. I hope my little dig into kind of the archive was right, but I think you were on staff for 27 years.
33.
33, okay. I was afraid I could have done that wrong, gotten that wrong. But yeah, she was the HOD of HKE. She started the first full-time ergonomics degree in South Africa. She did 2 terms as chairperson of the IEA Standing Committee for Ergonomics and IDCs. She's an IEA fellow, an ESSA fellow, a really important person.
And Andrew.
And Andrew's not as unimportant as he makes it out to be. He's the current HOD. He is one of Pat's students. A past ESSA president. He was a member of the IEA executive, so he's also not, he makes himself out to be really unimportant, but he actually isn't. But yeah, please take the floor, and I give my microphone back.
My wife gave me this, clearly a sign that she knows me well. And that triggers me, damn it. Here we go. It is an absolute pleasure for me to be standing here, and I think like Sma's reflection on a lot of ours, it is bizarre to be in the front here with some of the faces that are here. That brings up so many memories from years gone by. And Dr. John James has just walked in, and he'll be part of the presentations later. And we were just reminiscing about the dates projectors that we used to use. Yes, compared to this now.
And rodeos.
Yes.
You probably don't remember those, but I do.
Yeah, it's also particularly strange because I was telling the third years, when I stood here the first time doing this stuff, I was useless. Not a little bit useless, I was very useless. And I had to learn lectures off by heart. And it was a one-way transmission of information that probably lasted about 25 minutes when it should have lasted 45 minutes. No questions, because then you broke my train of thought and I was done. And she was the HOD and she still backed me. And here I am today. It's really, really cool. So it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon.
I saw what was in there.
Indeed. So we're going to do two things. And really what we're going to do is firstly show the evolution of the department from HMS into HKE. And she says I'm not allowed to, but I'm going to do it in this circumstance because it's appropriate. Prof is going to do that. Not Pat, Prof. Is going to do that for us. And then I'm going to show the time since Prof has left as to how we've hopefully continued to evolve the work that we are doing in the department. So she doesn't have slides, she's just going to talk, but I thought this was an appropriate picture to have up while she presents. So Prof, over to you, because it really does. She was the battle axe of HKE and of ergonomics back then, and I couldn't resist because it does reflect what you fought for. So over to you.
That I didn't need that. Guys, I've got to be. I'm getting older now, so I'm allowed a little bit of emotion. Because it is 20 years since I last stood here. I am emotional, but I am also exceptionally proud. Proud of my staff, that are now Andrew's staff. I'm so proud of you all. You saw how proud I was of Smart. And it's just, it was hard work. I'm telling you, it was hard work. But when I'm standing here talking to you people, I realize it was really, really worth the effort. So I'm going to go back to when I first lectured in the phys ed department. That's why you probably didn't get the years. I came to Rhodes as a, I don't know when, and for the phys ed department. And it was mentioned earlier that second year, there was a second year prac credit. And that prac was gymnastics and athletics. So how good would you all be? Then I've got to look for the dates, so the mind does go. 82, Professor Jack Charteris, who, yes, is now my husband, he came in and took over the department. And new broom sweep clean, and he swept clean. He really did push the academic agenda. And we introduced a second year anatomy and physiology credit in second year. And introduced the Vitruvian man. Mm-hmm. So you went from the anatomical, biomechanical, and physiological, etc., all in human kinetics. And then down the road, UPE had a very good sports science department. And we had and I'm going to say it, a not so good phys ed department. So when Jack came from Canada, he started talking about this concept of ergonomics. And so my talk is ergo what? And so Prof. Charteris and myself sort of chatted about it and wondered where we could go with it. And then we said, come on, let's start bringing it into the department. If you're discussing the Vitruvian man and all the aspects in sports science, well then it's the same human body that is going into the working environment. And so I used to say, sports science is maximizing output. Ergonomics is optimizing. And when we used to go into industry, and I sometimes talked about you're not working your workers at maximum. They said, yes, we must. I said, no, you mustn't. And I think we've just had an exceptionally good example of working at maximum. With the French Open and the Tennis Open, Alcaraz worked maximum. He could not have given more at the French Open. And only a few weeks later, he could not give it again at Wimbledon. He really couldn't. And the poor workers, and I'm talking poor workers because the working conditions in South Africa were, and I'm going to say it, still are horrendous. Because the worker's got to go in and work for 8 hours today. Guess what? Tomorrow and the next day and the rest day. And the rest of his working life till sometimes he's too old and tired, he or she, to work later. So we can't maximize, and don't as ergonomists talk about maximizing output, because you can't do it. You can't do it every day, all day. So, never daunted, Scott said, okay, I'll introduce ergonomics into first year. And I will never forget standing here and starting with ergo what? And I saw these blank faces, and I kind of sort of did this, and did this, and you know, God, she's losing it, you know, poor woman. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it was a great success, and I don't think it went down well. But I persevered. And in second year, I brought in an ergonomics module. And what I loved about that was as I was talking, I would see the penny drop, and the penny drop. And, oh, this ergo is not so bad. Trust me, there were a hell of a lot that still wanted sports science and didn't want ergonomics. But we persevered. Okay, so let me see where I'm going. Okay, so we then changed the name from phys ed to human movement studies to human kinetics, all in the arts faculty. And I then took over in, when did I take over?
95.
95, yeah. I took over in 95, and I'm afraid I went to Pat Terry's office quite often. Pat Terry was the Dean of Science in those days. And I said, come on, I hate to say it, but we've got to do another name change. He said, you can't, Pat. You can't do it. I mean, they won't know who you are. So I said, bad luck, we've got to. So we then changed the name to Human Kinetics and Ergonomics. And Prof. Terry supported us wholeheartedly and took us into the science faculty. So that was a major step in the right direction. Okay. So we then obviously got to get the concept. It's all very well giving theory, but ergonomics is a very practical subject. And as I said, conditions are dreadful. So what we've got to do, working conditions, we had to get the concept across to the students. So I used to go into industry in PE and take photographs of you know, the working conditions, come back and show them. Didn't work. We introduced ergonomics now as an honours course. And then I said, okay, we'll take the students into industry so they can see it rather than me put rude pictures up and things. So we went into, and Daimler Chrysler was very responsive. Where are you, Miriam? Miriam's dad was very supportive in getting us in. Went into various, and sort of about once a term, we'd go in and do a field trip into industry. And what did we see? We saw MMH. What's that? Manual material handling. It is all very well, with all due respect to Professor Thatcher, you can't do high-tech ergonomics in these IDCs. You have got to get down to basic facts and realize that it's very much a manual thing. And we wandered around, and the students, we went for working days. And we went for a field trip in the morning, and then we had a working lunch, sometimes had a worksheet, and then we went into another one in the afternoon. Okay, and so with this, the concept of ergonomics was very definitely developing in and being accepted in the department, but also in industry, and that was the big thing. I think I'm getting a message that's nearly time. Okay, we also started having a lot more masters and PhD students, but not enough, not by any means, and here's one of them sitting here that I'm so proud of. And with these visits into industry and with postgrads going out and doing research work, we started getting consultancy jobs and analysis, working analysis, you know, going in and asking to contract work. And we worked mainly in the mines, way down deep, a lot of work with the NEL and the Army, And we had, do you remember Lena?
Ramabai.
And Lena Ramabai, I can't see anybody small enough here. She was about this size. And
There
you are. There had to be a Lena. And we did an energy expenditure of army workers, the army people with different weight backpacks. And there's Lena marching with these guys with backpacks and everything. It was absolutely amazing. And there's some beautiful pictures of that too. Then we had a silly idiot who wanted to do something with forestry. And there she is, sitting amongst us. And so, Candace and I went into the and you have to get up about 4 in the morning, and you've got to go out, and then you've got to clean everything. And when you come in at night, you've got to download it all, you've got to clean it all. It's not an easy job to do a thesis in situ. Much easier to do a master's in the lab, trust me. And we went, I'll never forget this, I wonder if you remember it. We were putting the mask on with the worker standing between us, we were putting the mask on there. And of course they got all the cream and stuff on their face. And as I took the mask off, I looked at Candace and we saw blood. And we were bare hands. So I said, gloves, we've got to have them. So then we had to go into the lab and practice collecting all the data with gloves on. I mean, you do it automatically now. But that was something that we hadn't thought of, I must be honest. You know, when you suddenly go into industry, into real work in the field, you learn a lot more than goes on in the lab. While we were doing this, and this is how things grew. And then, and when we went in for consultancies and that, we had to be very careful with the health and safety people. And I think it is so important that we work together. But unfortunately, I think health and safety saw us as a threat and kind of cocky and demanding. And I think it's very important that you realize as ergonomists, you are trying to be proactive. You're trying to prevent things going wrong. And as a health and safety officer, you tend to be more reactive to a problem. I'm not saying that health and safety people are not a lot more aware of what they can do to prevent it. But when we were breaking through, it was definitely, ergonomics was proactive and health and safety was reactive. But it was a little bit of a threat and a little bit of whose toes you're treading on. So I think it's very important to get that link, which I think is there. So just a couple of international highlights. And I think one that is very important to this department was in 1997, we got a letter from C.J. Lee from mainland China. Please note that was long before China opened. It was 97. Well, he'd read a paper that I'd written in ergonomics, and that was why he wanted to come and do a master's here. I'll be honest with you, we had to go to government level to get him accepted. So John Lee came into the department. Well, what a work ethic, what a brilliant mind, just amazing. He understood English very well, but couldn't speak it too well. We tried to take, and he was a brilliant technician, so we tried to take him into running labs. And the students weren't happy because they couldn't understand what he was saying. But after a year, his work was so good that I went to Pat Terry and I said, I'm sorry, this guy's, he ain't a master's, he's a PhD. So we took him through to a PhD. But with that contact with Jean-Chan Lee, I was invited to go to an ergonomics conference, the first English-speaking ergonomics conference held in mainland China in 1998. And I actually lectured at Wuhan University.
Oh, wow.
Which was quite, yes, Wuhan of all places, and which was quite an experience. And I've got more reaction from the front row than I got. Oh, it was embarrassing. Any questions? I had an interpreter, obviously, because I couldn't speak Chinese, and no questions. And I like to interact, as you saw. So, and I kept saying, "Come, there's got to be a question. Got to be a question." And then eventually, and I said to my little interpreter, "Get somebody on." And eventually, a little hand went up. That was after about 3-4 days, because I lectured there for 10 days. And so it was a girl in the second row. And so, of course, I ran up to say, yes, what you, well, the poor guy, because a war man, poor guy just shrunk under his seat. The last thing he needed was to talk. But needless to say, we got it out of him, and then it followed. And the back row, by the way, was all professors from the university coming to listen to this idiot. Oh, by the way, also just a little, too many side issues. I was invited.
You see where I get it from, guys?
I was invited, Professor Pat Scott. Must be a male. Could be a male. It was a female. I mean, I really, when I got off the plane, you just saw, and they were all the very prim and proper Mao professors came to about 6 of them came to the airport. This was a big occasion for them. And as I walked down the steps, you just saw them going, oh my God. And particularly with the Chinese, not too sort of welcome with women. We had a male interpreter there. By the time we got to where I was staying, there was a female interpreter, but it was fun. So that was, and then I must be honest, because it was now taking off and we were feeling quite strong about ergonomics in the department, we realized that it was Jack Charteris and I. And so we had to, and Professor Charteris wasn't very keen on traveling anywhere, and I loved it. So I traveled the world, and I really did. I got some lovely experiences, lovely interaction, and everywhere I went, I would meet others and make sure I went to, sort of top researchers, and then would invite them back here. So we were pretty much an international department. I was either away or somebody was here, and that was where I met Hal Hendrick, who was the then president of the IEA, and he could not have been more supportive. He really was. And I think, say an awful big thanks, unfortunately he's deceased now, but a big thanks to Hal every time I think about ergonomics in this department, because he really did play a major role in helping us develop the discipline. Well, then, as well, mentioned, I was on the IEA, and they wanted, they of course wanted to come to darkest Africa. And so, wouldn't I organize a conference in Africa? So I thought, I can't really entice top international speakers to Grahamstown. Sorry, I love Grahamstown, but I just really didn't think that was going to work too well. So I persuaded Bob Bridger at UCT, who, that's how I was, as I said to you, Smile, they had a module of ergonomics at UCT. So Prof. Charteris and myself and Bob were organised an international conference in Cape Town. In when?
It was
Where's it
98, I think. John, you were there, weren't you?
He was very effort.
In the year.
98.
98, yeah.
98. Unfortunately, Professor Charteris's wife was very ill, so quite frankly, he did nothing, understandably. Bob Bridger was down there and doing his thing, and I was left with this big, and I'd really pushed for it. And I'm going to get emotional again, and I know he's not going to be impressed. But I could not have done it without my postgraduate students, and in particular, John James. They really, the postgrads were my right hand, male, men, women. It was amazing. And we worked bloody hard. And we had over 400 visitors, delegates from 41 countries. And we prepared it all here. I can't remember, do you remember it? Hey, how we got through, I wouldn't know. And then about 10 days before the conference, Planet Hollywood blew up. Just across the road from where the conference was going to be. Do any of you even remember or have heard about Planet? It was a major terrorist blow-up in Cape Town. Well, the phone never stopped ringing to know whether it was, whether we were going on. I'll be honest with you, a few Asian people, delegates, withdrew. And I will give you this little anecdote. A professor from London University phoned and said to me, Professor Scott, could you guarantee my safety if I come to Cape Town? And fortunately, I had my wits about me in those days, don't anymore. And I said, yes, if you can guarantee my safety next time I come to London. And that lady had the decency to come at the conference and say, I'm sorry, I was so stupid. So it was a grand success, and it was building and building. And so Cocky Scott says, well, if it's going to be so good, I'm going to invite the president of the country to open it. So I contacted President Nelson Mandela. And the best response was that I didn't get don't be stupid. They actually wanted more information, his office. And I don't know whether you people will remember Trevor Manuel. Trevor Manuel was health and safety and PE in those days. Sure. He was very supportive with ergonomics. And we were away on a field trip. Some of you heard this last night. We were away on a field trip in Knysna, I think, Forestry, a group of postgrads. And I got a phone call from my secretary, not June. It was, those of you who remember
Moira.
her.
Moira Japp.
Moira Japp. Prophet's the president. So I kind of knew it wasn't the president, but it was the president's secretary. And to say, very sorry, he wouldn't be able to come because he didn't get his priorities right. He had some important thing in Durban or something, but he wished us well. And so I think I've pushed my luck, and I think I've reached I think I've reached the end of my sort of notes. All I want to say is, folks, it was hard work. It was sometimes very frustrating. I like to think that it was successful, and I think some of you here have shown that it was. It was, as I say, tough, but incredibly, incredibly rewarding. And I would like to thank you all here who have made me very proud of this department and ergonomics in South Africa. Thank you.
So you can see where I get my storytelling from, yes? Yeah. Third year, as we're talking about learning through practice, you can see exactly where I got it from. Pat has spoken a lot about the work of starting ergonomics, but while she was doing that, she was actually doing science at the same time. And I thought I would share some of her science with you. And I've titled this purposely that Scott was a visionary, and you'll see why shortly. These are some of the things that she said. The first one's a very important one, where it really was Africa must do for Africa, through Africa, in essence, is the message.
That's
in
what I've been talking to
that first little bit, yeah? Second one was, yes, the work in the West is good in the labs, but actually it doesn't translate to meaningful action here in Africa. Thirdly, it is good to have those discussions with the North, but the North must also understand the global South. Slightly different words, but exactly what she was saying. And that we must do this through this idea of a cooperative co-responsibility. You take those words and you look at Rhodes's vision of today. Our vision is to be foremost in the generation and advancement of locally responsive, oh wow, yeah, through Africa, for Africa, by Africa, and globally engaged, engaging with the North, that seeks to be just and sustainable. That's exactly what Pat said in a paper in 2008. So I think we are lucky to have had her as the basis for the department. If you compare those, you see it very, very nicely. In that 2008 paper, and then going into a book that she published, and I think a whole lot of us here were actually contributors to it, she said the following: in order for ergonomics to be developed well in the global South, we needed research, certification, and education. And I thought I would take you on a very brief journey of how HKE has tried to respond to the challenge that our former HOD laid down to us back in the early 2000s. So yes, we continued with our lab research, and to this day we still continue with the lab research, because sometimes it's pretty hard to put people in the sea and to measure what we need to be measuring. This is from work that I did. We walked a lot. But we continued to do our lab research, and there are some interesting people on this slide here. There's a slightly younger Smith. There is a slightly younger Jono, with Miriam assisting him in his PhD work. There is Jono's wife, Lindsay, doing her research. And there is Candace and Jono at the very start of his journey into sleep research. We also continued to push, as Pat had taught us, outside of the lab into the real world, looking at continuing in forestry and brick and in sugarcane harvesting. And we were able to publish some very interesting and nice papers in this regard. But we also started to realize, and I think Sma hit on this head so beautifully when she said, you have to understand beyond the 8 hours of work if you want to truly understand people, and you want to understand the interactions between them and the work that they are doing. And so we started to force ourselves into a variety of different contexts, in this case into healthcare, and we've really done, I think, some nice work that now continues from a sustainable perspective. An emphasis here, not on working on people, but working with people. And I'm really proud when you start to look at some of the papers that we have in these, the people who are publishing with us. It's no longer just the academics that sit in this building that are publishing. It is us publishing with our partners, the people who are doing the work. And I think that is particularly important when it comes to this sort of thing, We recognize the plight of work and that work isn't always formal. And in fact, in this country, many people work in the informal economy. And this, to me, is something that we should always take home and something that Smo was talking about. This is how informal workers in this country feel. We operate as a nuisance. We operate as a nuisance. That is how we make workers. Yeah? And I always say to myself, because I think of my own kids. I think of my own kids. When you hear this, think of my own kids. That's a mother trying to earn money to send their kids to school. What a privilege to be able to be part of bringing their lives to light. That is what HKE is, yes? That is what ergonomics is. Into not only acknowledging that work occurs in work environments, also occurs at home. We have to wash clothes. We have to cook. And in many parts of South Africa, and Andrew was talking about this, this is in Soswetla, Silvertown, Alexandria Township and Joburg, where we've managed to be able to start to work with how do we redesign to make washing of clothes somewhat more sustainable and easier. I'm not sure we've got it right yet, but it's a start. We've been able to start to challenge the status quo. Prof was that, the battle axe. I think we've continued that mantle in the way in which we go about trying to understand where is knowledge, how is knowledge generated, who gets to generate knowledge, who gets to own that knowledge. It's not us, it's the workers. And we've been able to contribute to this, to try and understand what does it mean to develop country, society, work. We've been able to challenge our own discipline. Where is our discipline going and why is it going there? We have been able to shape international dialogue. For example, Jono talking here about how do we provide opportunities. And again, this is cool, like Smo was talking about, yes? Here, academics from here are working how to provide all of you, not just in South Africa, but globally with jobs, through working internationally with collaborators, etc. But it's not only about being in the academics, we also work with WHO, ILO, etc. And actually what struck me while I was going through this data is that we've collaborated with 13 different countries over this time. There are papers, each of those I counted, there are 13 different countries represented. I lost count of the number of authors. And you'll see tomorrow when Candice presents, this is nothing. Yeah? And this is just a third of what we do as a department. This is a third. Frickin' hell. Yeah? It is incredible when you start to think about it. And how we've shifted away from this idea of knowledge belongs and stays here. And I really love this idea of promoting human development. This is particularly from a French approach to ergonomics, ACE, activity-centered ergonomics. Where if work does not provide you with opportunities for development, that work cannot make you well. So if we want to understand what it truly means to be an ergonomist, I think we need to start to understand that. Wellness, to be well, yes, ergonomics, the two outcomes, human performance, well, system performance and human well-being. Human well-being cannot occur without development. If work does not provide you with opportunities for development, it is not achieving what it needs to achieve. And I think that is what we as a department have been able to do. What's the magic ingredient? It's bizarre to me actually because you touched on it. But actually, this paper is from the Center M. Every student here knows it because we still teach it today. And it is that basis of understanding the interactions between the biophysical, the physiological, and the cognitive, and understanding them holistically. That translates to ergonomics, it translates to sports science, it translates to physical activity, it doesn't matter where. This remains the basis of what we do as a department. And because we've stayed true to this, our students have the ability to add systems thinking, to add whatever they need to be able to go into whatever direction they need to. We cool, we do a lot. Sma covered that beautifully, and thank you, Sma. And I wanted to, rather than to focus this, is to congratulate ESSA on 40 years. It's an amazing achievement, and yeah, we are proud to have Sma as chair. Sma covered that. Something that I think we're also really proud of, actually, is we've also recognized that ergonomics cannot be done just in an academic context, but we also need to be working with cognate disciplines and with business and with government. And I think this is really, really cool. At least 130 people have now participated in our short courses, of which I think I counted 50 are government officials, at least from the Department of Employment and Labor and from the Department of Health in Gauteng. That has meaningful impact, and it is why we get the traction that we do get within government. I don't think we can underestimate that. I wanted to finish with this, and it relates a little bit to what Andrew was saying about what is the future of work. We don't know. We don't know how rapidly it's going to change, and we don't know where it is going, and I agree wholeheartedly with Sma. There's lots for us to do in Africa. But I do know the way that we're going to get there. And it is through a cooperative co-responsibility. Thank you very much. Thank you. Shall we do the questions afterwards? Eh?
We have time for one more question while we hand over here. Okay, now you mustn't all get shy because of the example from China. You can ask the question. I'll ask one question while Jono gets up. If you can give one, but only one piece of advice to students, what will you say?
Believe in yourself.
Touch this. Yeah.
And then follow it. But follow it with purpose.
Thank you.
I have nails. It's going to help me.
All right, we're going to the last presentation of the day before we go into our Q&A session about the future. Thank you. And we've mentioned it or heard it a few times today that the working day is a little bit longer than 8 hours. And if we only look at those 8 hours, we're actually missing a good bit of important information. So Professor Jonathan Davey will now talk about contributions to sleep research. Jono studied at Rhodes, PhD at Rhodes. Prof. Scott taught him, I taught him. He's a past ESSA president, he was on the IEA committee, he knows what he's talking about, so please. And take your time.
Okay, thank you. So I think in February of 2003, like Sma, I was sitting here. I wasn't in the front. I was at the back, nervous and unsure of myself. And one Professor Pat Scott walked in and drew that on the board and just looked at us and said, "What's that all about?" I think the HK students know that because, with respect, now you know where it's come from. I never knew how important that very simple diagram would be for my understanding of the discipline of human factors and ergonomics, but then also for the study of sleep in humans. Just so that you know, that is humans' interactions with their environment, and that interaction leaves both the human and the environment altered. And really what we're trying to do is optimize that interaction, or in some cases maximize it, to ensure safety for the health, for the human and ultimate performance. But there's such beauty and simplicity in that diagram, but it is so complex when it comes to trying to understand humans or any organism's interaction with their environment when we look at things like sleep and circadian rhythmicity. And so I've had the pleasure of making sense of what Pat Scott threw at me in 2003 and trying to integrate it into a line of research that myself and other colleagues in the department have spent the better part of 15 years trying to develop. And that there is a complex relationship between humans and their environment, and that a lot of our behavior, any organism's behavior, is driven by changes in the environment. The only thing is that we can now ignore it often, and that leads to a lot of health issues, particularly around sleep and disruptions to circadian rhythms. But what I want you to think about when we're going through this particular talk is that our relationship, or our body's relationship with the environment is like a conductor conducting an orchestra. We have a biological clock that drives a lot of what we do on a daily basis. And that biological clock is connected and influenced by the environment around it. And we need to ensure that we are playing in tune all the time. We need to ensure that our bodies are listening to that master clock, that all the cells in the bodies are playing in tune, and that is what we need for health and for well-being and for performance. But there's so many things in our lives now, in our work lives, in our private lives, in sport, that disrupt that rhythm, that disrupt that music, that disrupt that relationship between the master clock and the rest of the cells, that ultimately lead to poor quality and insufficient sleep, circadian disruption, and changes in health and well-being. And I'm going to try and paint a little bit of the history of how the department has shaped its understanding and trajectory towards sleep research in different contexts. So it started with these two gentlemen. You'll know, many of you will know some of them on the screen. On this left is Shu Skitter. Shu was a preeminent researcher at the CSIR in Joburg and was a forefront leader, and at Rhodes.
And yeah, he was my student.
There we go. There we go. And Shu drove a lot of research in the industry, particularly in mining, around fatigue. And so a big advocate for fatigue management in South African mines. And the man to his other side is Professor Matthias Goebel, who succeeded Professor Pat Scott as HOD of the department in 2006 and was my PhD supervisor. Now we've seen some of these pictures, is that there's Shu in the start. I originally started under supervision of Candice, and we were going to do heat stress research, Candice, right, in the mines, and then politics got involved and we couldn't do that. But then we met Shu. And Shu was like, there's lots of work to be done in fatigue in mining, particularly in haul truck drivers. And so he very kindly exposed me and Candice and Matthias to the effects of 24-hour haul truck operations. And while it was something that we were intending to go towards, doing research in mines, trying to understand sleep loss and fatigue in haul truck drivers, again, politics and accidents and access to mines was lost. And so we had to pivot quickly and we moved into laboratory work. So that was the first kind of work in sleep research where we transformed some of the department spaces into labs, where we allowed students to have naps, because that's what we studied. We looked at the effects of napping during simulated night shift work on cognitive and physiological performance and responses. And that was really kind of, I guess, in some way, the beginning of a long history of sleep research that followed. From then, we also, as a department, obviously focused heavily, not just on spaces where there was work going on, but sport as well. And that's what I loved about this department. It had always painted this option of going into these different careers, whether it was sport, activities of work. And sports people, high-level sports people, also experience sleep loss for several different reasons. Whether that's competition, whether that's pain, whether that's training, whether that's travel, they are high-functioning athletes that do need those fundamentals. And so under the leadership of Candice Christie and Dr. Lee Pote, who's also here in the room, and Trav Steenekamp, Kayla, and her name's Kath Monroe, Candice got an NRF grant to study sleep in Proteus. And so we followed the Proteas, I think, at 2016, 2015, on tours to Zimbabwe, tours to Australia. And it was the first time that the department ever got an ActiWatch. That's that little device there that's a research-grade sleep tracker. And so we were able to put those on the athletes and follow them, look at their light exposure, and look at their sleep-wake behavior. In short, and very simply, it's got an accelerometer in it, so it measures movement. And so it's validated that when you are technically not moving that much, you must be asleep. And when you're moving more, then you're probably awake. And we can also see when you are exposed to light and not, and different types of temperature. And on the side there, you can see the kind of diagram that it produces, which is really useful for an athlete to see, particularly if their sleep is disrupted, if their sleep is highly irregular. The blue bit, by the way, is the sleep. Everything else is wakefulness. And so you can really visually show an athlete what their sleep looks like and what they can do to try and improve it, and hopefully they work with their coaches to do that as well. And so there was some really nice outputs there, really nice paper by Kayla here on getting sleep or get stumped, where she looked at the South Africans, and then there was a couple of lab-based studies looking at the effects of time of day on different types of cricket performance. So the research in sleep continued, but predominantly in the laboratory. And that was both in the context of work and both in the context and in sport. But in about the same time, around 2014, the department seemed to go back to its roots, which was physical education. And we identified through several engagements with the local community, local schools, that particularly in the township, scholars weren't getting access to afternoon activities. They weren't getting access to physical literacy and basically becoming physically active. And we know that that's important for physical health and cognitive health and well-being. And so we started to engage a lot more with the community, and we gave opportunities to students to go into the township and work with students, exposing them to different principles of physical activity and health and well-being and motor fitness. You can see some of those activities at the top there. And that sort of morphed into working with other community sports groups, and ultimately, more recently, working in the High Performance Center, which we still do today. A lot of students still go up there even to this day. We started to interact with different spaces on campus, this is in the middle here, who employed people with disabilities to harvest insects for biological control, which was fascinating work. But the people with disabilities standing next to bodies of water with the risks of falling in. So there's lots that could be learned by students interacting with these individuals, understanding the pinch points and the constraints they faced at work, while also trying to see how they could apply their knowledge about ergonomics to improving the situations. And it's fitting that this picture is here because it's Mandela Month, and Rhodes was a leader in the idea of trading life for Mandela. 67 minutes of service for the community, and the department on the annual basis did several events during Trading Life for Mandela Day. And what it did is it started to shift our paradigms away from perhaps keeping all our stuff here, all our pracs, all our research here, and moving it into the community, and as Andrew said, being a little bit more locally responsive and engaged with the needs of the community around us. I had the privilege, along with Ben Ryan and Andrew Todd, to be awarded the Vice Chancellor's Community Engagement Award for that work. And I didn't necessarily see that just as the accolade, but as a call to say, right, now the responsibility begins. And certainly Andrew, as our HOD, has taken up the baton and continues that. But we must also know at the same time that the South African higher education system went through several very difficult but very important protests between 2015 and 2017. I'm talking about the Fees Must Fall protest and more closely the RU referenceless protest. I was across the road when Prof. Mabuzela was being, he wasn't being shot at, but he was putting his hands up in front of the police who were shooting at students who were protesting. These movements were pivotal for a person of my skin color, of my background, of my privilege, of my mindset, as an academic who was starting to teach, as you've rightly said, more students of color from more diverse backgrounds who could now get access to university. And we had to start to change our mindsets about teaching, about learning, about research, about access. It was an extremely difficult but extremely transformative experience for this department, because I think we dealt with it in a very meaningful way. And it led, again, to a reorientation about we cannot keep our stuff here. We need to share. We need to learn from the community, need to learn from people in our environment around us so that we know how to educate our students, train them to serve their communities, and ultimately go out there and serve the communities. And then Prof. Mabazela's calls, this is when I was appointed as a lecturer, about what our responsibilities were as academics, is that everything that we do needs to advance public good. It needs to ensure that it is sustainable. It needs to be locally responsive but globally engaged, and it needs to advance social justice. And it seemed to be a pivot point, certainly in a lot of the research that was done in the department. Andrew's already given you a bit of a hint at that, but certainly in the trajectory of the sleep research, and I think you'll probably hear from Candice tomorrow around physical activity, health, etc., it was quite poignant. And so what we started to see was a change in the pedagogy. And what a pedagogy is just a way of teaching. Professor Scott spoke about the fact that she went into industry, took pictures, came back here and showed pictures to students. It's devoid of context. You can't understand the constraints that people face unless you are sitting next to them. And so that's exactly what Professor Scott did. She took them there. Experience it. What service learning does is it takes it a step further to say, now you need to meaningfully engage with the work that is being done and link it to the theory that you are learning in class. Reflect, research, reflect, and provide information or support or recommendations back to the people that you're working with. So it is a lot more focused on the concept of service rather than just taking information. And so this was important because it was the basis for changes in the way that we did research from, I guess you want to call it value-free, but your typically lab-based research done here, devoid of a certain context, into the field, working on people, to one that was more engaged, where we were working alongside people, with people, and for people. And so what did that look like in terms of the research? So now back to the side. So in 2016 at the African Symposium for Human Factors in Aviation Safety, and I think that probably would have been an ESSA conference as well, we gave a presentation on managing fatigue in aviation. It's about the human. Just after that, we were invited by ALPA SA. ALPA SA were the union, Airline Pilots Association of South Africa, who had recognized that the flight and duty periods, basically the regulations in the country that governed how long pilots worked, how much rest they had, when they could take their rest, etc., and what their duties would look like, was outdated and not based in science. And so they approached the department to say, please can you help us develop this proposal, which we want to submit to the South African Civil Aviation Authority to change this, because pilots are fatigued. They're exhausted, and who wants a fatigued pilot at the front of the plane? How it works in industry is that largely the way in which the laws work is that it's largely prescriptive. You may work 14 hours, no more. You may fly 7 hours, no more. You may get 9 hours of rest, no more, no less. So it's very prescriptive. And the way that the industry was changing is pilots were flying for much longer, the days were longer, the industry became more complex, and so they needed to start to move to more fatigue risk management, which is actually proactively managing the risks that emerge, monitoring that information, collecting that data, and responding to it. But we're not quite there yet, so the prescriptive limits was where we needed to be. But the key here is that they require operational experience combined with scientific evidence to create that shared responsibility and design these flight and duty periods according to the latest science and operational experience. And so that began in 2016, and I watched the beautiful fight that we see typical between business and unions, because they're speaking different languages, but really they're not, if they just turn back at the same. One is focusing on the money, the other is focusing on the human and what's good for the human. And actually, if you focus on the human and their well-being, it's probably going to be good for profits too. So there was a argy-bargy. The industry rejected the initial proposal. We went back and redid it, and this was over 5 years now. And this is a picture that was taken just outside the South African Civil Aviation Authority with myself, Swancha, and several students. And it was at that meeting that there was an industry commitment that roads would be committed to doing research in the industry to provide data to underpin the decisions that were going to be made to changing the law, which was wonderful and really exciting. And to this day, we continue with that research because there happened to be a little bit of a pandemic just after that particular meeting. Literally 2 months later, don't do research in the aviation industry even after a pandemic. It's been a long journey, and I know that there's several students in this room currently who are still reeling as a result of that. But Chloe and Cleo, I admire your tenacity. We are nearly there. Ntati, I know you've just handed in, and Ntati did HEMS pilots, helicopter emergency pilots, looking at shift work, alertness, and sleepiness. And as of today, Sharissa Borchard has submitted her thesis on aerial firefighting. So it's really exciting to know that that research continues, and while it's not necessarily feeding into the law, the discussions on the law, it will feed back to the industry and help them to manage the fatigue better than maybe they were already. But what I can say is that in 2024, after 9 years of debate and a pandemic and everything, the original work group that was started in 2016 continued to meet. And in 2024, there was a change in the law for pilots. And if you look at the old law, this is one change, but I can't explain all the others. They had a minimum of 9 hours of rest. A minimum of 9 hours of rest. So that doesn't include commuting, by the way. Okay? So if you're in Joburg, you commute an hour, you get home, you've pretty much got 7 hours before you have to commute back again. All right? So it's no wonder that pilots are fatigued. And ultimately what ended up happening is that they increased it to 12. It's better than nothing. But the point is that it took a lot of time. It took a lot of agreeing and backward and forward, but eventually, ultimately, the evidence prevailed. This is in the best interests of the human, and I hope, and I spoke to a pilot on the weekend, she says it's much better as a result of that. So we played a small part in that, and I'm very chuffed that this department can say that. Then the world turned upside down in 2020, and we all remember that. Maybe not so fondly, maybe some of us fondly. We were forced to distance ourselves from loved ones, stay in strange places, queue in very strange ways, wear masks and sanitize and all sorts of things, all under different levels of alert and lockdown, which limited things like activity and alcohol sales. At the time, there seemed to be an emergence of some really interesting research coming out of the global north around the effects of lockdowns that were happening in China and in America that were preceding what happened in South Africa in March. And so what ended up happening is that the department wrote to several academics that we had met at the South African Symposium for Sleep and Health in 2018. We wrote to them and we said, guys, we've only met you once or twice, but would you like to collaborate on trying to understand the effects of this lockdown on South Africa and the effects that it's having on our health, on our mental health, on sleep, on our behaviors, on physical activity and everything. And all of a sudden, there was this collaborative team from UCT, WITS, I think KZN, and Coventry. And we started to meet. And ultimately, the group that we met focused on, just at that point, we couldn't do anything else besides a survey, trying to understand the changes in work, physical activity, screen time, lifestyle behaviors and sleep behaviors, as well as mental health, during that hard lockdown compared to before it happened. So we just asked people to complete a survey, and it was interesting what we found. We got about 1,000 people to respond to that. And since then, we've had 3 papers published from that, which have been really interesting. But what we ended up finding was interesting and important for us to not necessarily lose sight on is that work hours decreased during that hard lockdown. That makes sense because generally work stopped. But those that did work went to work later and finished earlier. That sounds like a good deal. So we worked less, argue maybe sometimes more productively. Sleep hours on average went up, and that was consistent across the globe because people went to bed later and woke later because they didn't have to go to work at the usual time. Also sounds like a pretty good deal, right? We drank less alcohol, but that's because there wasn't any, unless you knew somebody who could source you some. But because of the restrictions during that hard lockdown and the fact that you were restricted to your home or your place of residence, sitting time went up. Thanks Zoom, screen time went up, all right? Exercise went down because the government also imposed restrictions on people exercising in public. You couldn't go out in public, or when you did, during the less hard lockdowns, you could exercise for a very short amount of time. And so no wonder depression and anxiety levels and insomnia levels escalated across the globe. And particularly in individuals with a history of depression, insomnia, and anxiety, and particularly in women and in students. And so there are lessons that we mustn't forget from what happened in COVID. But I think it seems to be in a distant memory. But it's all the more reason why this department is important, because we promote physical activity. We try and limit sedentary behavior, promote healthy sleep-wake behavior, and healthy dietary habits as well. But what that led to, because of the establishment of that group of researchers from across this country, it was an opportunity to start a society. Now, this is not in competition with ESSA, so join ESSA, but you can also join SASH.
Join ESSA first.
Yes. SASH was created in 2021. That's the South African Society for Sleep and Health, which has a medical dental arm, it has an allied health professionals arm, and it has a research and science arm. And so far it's hosted 2 conferences in Cape Town and Joburg, which this department has been intimately involved in the organization of. It is also hosting masterclasses just about every other month, and is also offering student bursaries for those that are doing research in sleep. And I can tell you now that at the moment, because we've seen that there's a lack of research in South Africa and across Africa really, the science arm are doing a systematic review of all sleep research that's being conducted in the SADC countries. So that's really exciting, and I'm really chuffed that SASH was formed. With that same group of researchers, in 2022, the Wellcome Trust, which is a big funder in the UK, sent out a call. They call it the Mental Health Call. And in short, their argument was that we know that there's a relationship between disruptions to circadian rhythmicity and sleep and changes in mental health. So poor sleep often leads to or is associated with poor mental health, most mental disorders. But despite that relationship, that understanding of that relationship, we don't understand the mechanisms that drive that relationship. What causes that relationship? And in particular, we don't understand it. We don't understand it longitudinally. So there needs to be research to understand how mental health, sleep, and disruptions to circadian rhythms change over time. And so we need to develop studies that have done that, particularly in adolescents and in individuals that are in their 3rd decade of life, which is where these mental health disorders are the most predominant. And so from that original COVID research group, we decided, let's try. Let's put something together. And so we proposed a study that is, the clock is ticking, a longitudinal multi-site study addressing teen sleep as a means to limit depression and anxiety. Now, for those of you that have all been through adolescence, you'll remember that adolescence was a tough time for many different reasons, and that all sorts of things are changing in your body, in your space, in your social circles, and that can ramp up anxiety, that can ramp up mental health challenges, and a lot of that also changes your sleep-wake behavior. So it made sense for us to focus on this. But we didn't want to call it that because that's boring. And so we're working with teenagers, and so what we came up with is that we came up with a project for forward-facing name, Sleep and Circadian Health in Adolescence, a Mental Health Participation Study, or the Sleep Champs. And I remember one of my colleagues saying to us when we put the application, he's like, we've got about 5% chance of getting it because it's a global call, and blow me down, after several interviews and several applications, there it was. We got the grant. And really what the focus of the grant is that we're aiming to identify the sleep and circadian related mechanisms through which adolescents develop or demonstrate resilience to depression and anxiety. So in short, we want to understand what drives these changes, but also when they occur. Because if we understand what causes it and we understand when it happens, that is the opportunity to design interventions to prevent it from happening in the first place. It is also the first time that we really engaged with the idea of what engaged research means. And that's why I mentioned the involvement or the importance of community engagement and of service learning and of those sometimes uncomfortable experiences that we went through in higher education, which were really important to show the importance of research having a social justice lens and not necessarily just being kept here, but also being done in the service of people with people. And that's the important part, is that you're working collaboratively with groups who are affected by a certain thing or have special interests to address issues around their well-being. So here's some of the team here. This is our PI, Gosha. This is Svansha. This is our first attempt at doing polysomnography. And this was our first meeting in Coventry where we engaged with what we call lived experience experts, which I'll explain on the next slide. The clicker is deciding to, you've been pressing it too hard, Sma. So this is just a bit of an overview of the project. It started with a looking back phase. So each site, because there are 3 sites, Cape Town, Makanda, and Coventry, each site recruited what's called lived experience experts. A lived experience expert is somebody with a lived experience of whatever you are trying to study. In this case, it's anxiety or depression or sleep problems or all of that, who are from that community, who have an experience of living with those challenges in that space, that you consult to try and understand their experience and integrate that experience into the research that you're doing so that you ask the right question and you conduct the research in a culturally and contextually sensitive way, that you interpret the data the same way, and that this data is disseminated in an accessible way that is meaningful to the people who need it the most. And so every single site has a board that advise them through this process. And that's been really, really exciting. It's extremely difficult sometimes because of there's differences in terms of interest between researchers and communities, but the richness is in that gray area. And so we'll be following grade 8s, 13-year-olds, for 3 years. We started this year in 2025. Coventry started last year in 2024. We've just finished our first baseline. We'll follow them in next year and then a following year to try and see what changes happen and what causes those changes, whether it's driving to mental health challenges or not, and ultimately provide them support if they need it. So what this meant is that the department now has more technology and more techniques that we've had to learn. One of those is polysomnography. That is basically the gold standard of how to track sleep and understand the staging of sleep in the brain. So all of those electrodes that are under that durag over there of Sanchez are measuring different parts of the brain and different parts. That's what they called it. Hey, that's right. Yeah. Duk. Duk. And basically we can see the different activity that's going on in the brain while people sleep, and you can pick up sleep disorders from that. So we have two of those in the department at the moment. We can measure heart rate variability to measure hyperarousal and stress while people sleep. We're starting to do some genetics to look at whether your genetic predisposition to being a morning type person or an evening type person influences your sleep-wake behavior and your risks towards anxiety and depression. And one of our offices upstairs, I forget 37, is no longer an office, it's a Dilma room where we collect melatonin saliva under red light. We collect saliva to measure melatonin under red light. So a lot of really exciting techniques that we've had to get to grips with. And go back. So what are we at? Where do we get to now? So I think one of the real highlights for me was recruiting participants across the town in very diverse educational settings, from high-end private schools to township schools. And you can see those two pictures above and below the one, two very different learning environments for learners in the same town. And I'm really chuffed that we were able to get learners from across the spectrum, because I think science needs to be shared, the messaging around sleep health needs to be shared, and the communication of the science needs to be done in different languages. And so I just need to acknowledge my team that are here for the invaluable contribution they've made to translating the science into local languages to make it accessible to parents and learners so that they could be part of the study. And so where are we? Well, we're in the middle of it. This is, over here is our one of, I think, 3 sets of twins that we have in the study, which is really interesting. It's been a hell of a lot of fun, a hell of a lot of work, because the window for testing is 8 weeks. So we've fitted 120 kids into a 2-week protocol in 8 weeks. So you can do the math as to how that works. So 120 kids doing a 2-week protocol in 8 weeks. It was 8 weeks, right? Yeah. So it's been very intense, but I've got an incredible team here that have made all the difference in terms of getting access to all the different spaces in Makhanda. I'm going to use the computer. So where to from now? Where are we headed in terms of sleep research? Well, the Lancet in 2023 argues that there is a need to promote sleep health across the globe. If you just have a look at that diagram, anything in blue means that there's general data on the population with respect to sleep health. Anything in green means that there's some data on specific populations. Anything in red, there's no data. So I think you can agree that there's opportunity in Africa. And so in terms of sleep health, there's always going to be shift work. There's always going to be school. There's always going to be things that are interfering with people's ability to get good quality sleep. There's always research to be done. There's a job to be done. And in particular, just recently the Lancet called for the call to action for the second commission on adolescent health and well-being. I don't mean to sort of overwhelm you with that, and the point is for you not to read that, but those are the challenges that young people aged 10 to 24 face now that influences their health, their well-being, and their mental health, and ultimately the generations that they will father and mother. And so we have a responsibility as systems experts to ensure that we are trying to understand the impact of these on young people, so that we look after young people that will eventually become mothers and fathers, so that we don't have the burden of disease that we may have as a result of climate change, as a result of war and conflict, as a result of pandemics. And HFE is a discipline that can do that. And I'm chuffed to hear and to know and to share, but you'll hear about this more tomorrow, that HAXA, which is the Healthy Active Kids South Africa, which is led by Professor Candice Christie, has now, for the first time under her leadership, included sleep as an indicator of health and well-being in children. So it is the first time, I think globally, Candice, it's the first time that sleep has been included in and will be included in the report card, looking at it as a metric for what is healthy for children and adolescents. So Candice, to you, thank you so much for your leadership in that, and we look forward to hearing more about that tomorrow during your inaugural. Thank you. But ultimately, all of this couldn't have been done with postgrads, with enabling colleagues, both here and far away, a supportive family, and a department that is just so welcoming, that is so encouraging, and allows one to explore different academic interests, research areas. But I do just want to acknowledge the postgrads that have been through this program. Without you, we wouldn't have learned what we have, and we wouldn't be where we are today. So with that, thank you very much for the chance to be here and to share this with you, and we look forward to future celebrations at the cocktail party and celebrating while we listen to Candice's inaugural tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Okay, this is yet now a bit awkward, but I don't have a microphone, so I just speak loud enough. No, I'm sure that's fine. We have time for one question before we go into the Q&A. One. Not a Chinese one, a real one. You guys are shocking.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Everything was clear.
Cool. In that case, thanks, Jono.
No, pleasure.
Also.
Thank you.
Okay. We are now, where's Miriam? We are now going to look a little bit into the future, and Miriam is going to facilitate a Q&A with our invited guests, and I hope you all know if you've been invited to be in the Q&A. Yeah, I'm now just going to hand over to you to talk into a particular area. No, just something weird just come on. Okay, I'm just going to project my voice. Thank you. Pop it on here somewhere. Is that how you do it? Okay. Thank you. Sorry, where's the other? You've got the mic? Okay, working. Where's Luke? Can you just hold on to that for the roaming mic? And okay. Yes. So that's okay. Okay.
See you.
Sorry. No. Because I didn't think of a question to start with. Okay. All right, so for the last 15 minutes, we are going to run a Q&A session. We have listened to a lot of information this afternoon, so I can understand if you're feeling a bit shell-shocked. But I just quickly want to introduce you to our panelists in front. And the idea is that you raise your hand, you ask a question, and we'll bring the mic to you, you answer your question, and our panelists then respond. All right, that's how Q&A works. So obviously you know Jono Davey, Andrew Thatcher, Professor Pat Scott, Smaklamu Tukulula, and the one person that you would not be familiar with is Dr. Jonathan James. What you may have gathered from the presentations is that he is a former PhD student, has been lecturing in the department as well, and who is now a senior risk advisor for KPMG. He has absolutely no online profile, so I wasn't even able to stalk him. So before we start with the questions, I just am going to ask Jono to introduce himself, because between when I last helped him with his PhD data collection, which was like 20 years back, and now a lot has happened. Just speak into that or keep it on to you.
Sure, no problems. I'll speak into this. Afternoon, everyone. It's really awesome to be here. The same as Prof said, the last time I was in this lecture venue was 20 years ago. Exactly the same. So when you and Prof Jack were lucky enough to move to Cape Town, we unfortunately moved to Joburg. The one major benefit, though, is the golf is really good there. So the other Prof Thatcher knows that that's one of my favorite passions. So my background, as Miriam indicated, was in automotive, and then I worked with Shu Skitter in mining. And the reason why I don't have an online profile is I'm a flexitarian now, so I work for myself. And it's quite interesting. It's just fantastic, Prof, to chat about legacy here. And the reason why I came was obviously to be part of the celebration, but to share with Candice as well. Candice and I started at a similar time in our postgrad work. So it's wonderful to see where the department's at. It's great to be here. Unfortunately, I'm not here for tea day on Friday, so June's going to have to give me something in lieu of that. I work completely in a corporate context now, so if you've got any questions about future career prospects in that space, I'm your person. And if you want to know how to ghost people online, I'm your person as well.
Okay, do we have any questions from the floor? Luke has got a roaming mic, so he can take it to you, and I will pass this little clip-on mic to whoever answers the question. Okay. Yes, you've got a question? Okay. Jono. Andrew.
Other John.
John, you missed Snow's presentation. With the caveat of a couple of people, she indicated that engineers are a problem in her life.
I wonder why.
I was interested in your view from a corporate perspective. How do we, as the practitioners and academics working on the outside, convince those engineers that we may have some value to add to them?
Yeah, such an interesting context, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation earlier. Unfortunately, I was in my flexi space on Teams. John, I think I've got sleep deprivation because I wake up in the morning on Teams and I go to bed on Teams. So that's how the working world's changed. So if I look at the corporates and the groups that I work with, so I work still typically with the mining houses. I think that's a very accurate observation where influencing your mech engineers, your mining engineers, and trying to provide an influence over them is still fundamentally difficult. What is really, really enlightening about the space that you guys are in is that you're doing such practical work. So, you know, if I look at fatigue management, if we look at the real practical work like Prof. Pat was saying, I think your influence has to come out of your delivery. The context for a lot of companies, as Jono said, is around how you monetize things. For me, my key learning in consulting has always been you've got to find a way to make it an economically viable play. That's really where it starts, right? So if I'm trying to convince a mining house to do the work, and you'll know this from your consulting as well, you need to make it an economically viable position for them to fundamentally adopt a change. And that to me is really interesting because the work that you're doing at a community level here is a no-brainer. But to an engineer, something that should be a no-brainer isn't fundamentally that. So my suggestion, and I mean you would have had this in your consulting space, is you need to build the reference cases, you need to build the use cases around why you can monetize it differently, because unfortunately it does become a cash game, especially in a tight economy. So in the area that I operate in, a lot of what I do is around cost optimization. You know, you guys are in a totally different space. You're in such an engaging space. For me, this is so fantastic to see people actually excited to be here and laughing. The last time I laughed in a meeting was probably like 2005. You just don't laugh in a corporate, right? Because you'll get kicked out the call, or you'll get demobbed. So yeah, that's my view. But I mean, I just want to make one final comment. Well done to the department. It's amazing what legacy you have, and it's really engaging. Like for us to see the work that you're doing. Congrats on such a fundamentally diverse research portfolio, and well done to all of you for getting so involved in different areas. You know, Andrew's always mentioned to me, nobody's really stayed in one lane. You guys have really found different ways. So well done. That's fantastic, and that's certainly not corporate.
Sino's got a question.
Thank you. I had to write my question down because English is not my mother. to an extent, but I'm hoping that it being a direct question will allow our panelists to expand more on it. How can HFE professionals, or rather young HFE professionals, contribute to South Africa's compliance with international standards and best practice? And based on some of the conversation and the presentation, is that something that we want to do? Are we trying to comply? Do we want to? And how do we approach as young panelists, professionals into that space? Hope that makes sense.
Do any of the panelists want to answer that? I thought it would be you.
Of course, I definitely work in the compliance space. I think compliance will open the door for you to be able to get in and have the conversations and do the work and provide the solutions. And I used to be a bit naive when I started. I'm like, oh, I don't want clients that are just wanting compliance. I want something more. And I realized, that's not going to work. People are interested in what do I need to do? What will not get me shut down by a regulator? What do I need to check the boxes and meet them where they are at? Because once you're on the inside, if you are having impactful solutions and you're helping them solve the problems that they think are important, it then opens up the door for you to say, hey, actually, here's more that you can benefit from if you are actually, applying ergonomics to its full extent. It's a difficult conversation to have because there's time constraints, there's budget constraints, and really it is about the mullah at the end of the day. But I think from a compliance perspective, the regulators are becoming really smart about making companies, what's the word? Accountable, that's the right word. Accountable to doing things the right way. And so even with the conversations with the engineers, some of them, even if the money sense doesn't make sense to them, because of the compliance requirements, they are then forced to listen to what we have to say. In terms of, is that where we want to be at? I think, that's where that's what we have, that's what we work with for now, and you can only make the changes internally is what I realized. You can't be shouting from outside, you must be inside, and only then do they listen to you. Just pass it on. Oh, sorry.
So there's a couple of ways of answering that question too. So, and there are different types of companies that are out there. The problem with standards and regulations is that they state the minimum that you're required to do. But the minimum is just going to not get you into trouble. So the types of things which John James was talking about, what organizations, good organizations are trying to do, they're trying to go beyond the minimum. They don't want to just meet the minimum standards. If you're in a really, really cash-strapped environment, maybe you're just trying to get the minimum to make sure that you don't get a fine that'll put you out of business. But most organizations are looking for more than that. They're looking for return on investment. They're looking for improvements in safety so they don't have to spend more on insurance. They're looking for a whole range of other things. So really the question would be about how do you find best practice as opposed to how do you meet the minimum requirements. And so no, it's not good enough for us just to meet we shouldn't really just be aiming as a country to meet the minimum standards. We should be looking at trying to produce best practice so that we can be better than everyone else. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have a follow-up question to that? JD, okay, and then I'll get to you.
My question, hi guys, good afternoon. Panelists. I just wanted to ask Smia on the effect of the military and applying ergonomics in that field. And then also for panelists, we as Ergonomics department, I do feel that we act internationally a lot. And that for me personally, it looks like it is more driven individually. Not individually in a sense, but department-wise. But my question is, how is this economics understood by this university, let's say? That's my question. And is it being used, if this question can be answered?
Can you clarify about the military ergonomics? What are you wanting to find out?
It's just you spoke about this is more, you guys are more approaching that sense or being more interactive with the military.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask what is the approach to further this maybe, and how this will be used in a sense, in a military sense?
Okay, I think I understand your question. So I must maybe give a disclaimer. I don't work in the military anymore, but that's one of the first places I did work at Ergotech under Arms Corps when I left Rhodes University. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the military space is one of the industries where ergonomics and human factors has been applied probably the longest in the country. They are miles ahead. Unfortunately, you won't hear about it because everything is classified. But for example, and I think I can say this, they have the biggest, most up-to-date database, anthropometric database in the country, and maybe even in the continent. And they have a lot of work that they're doing. Unfortunately, as the public outside, we can't really interact with it. We can't get access to it. But I think they are trying to find ways that they can recruit people like you guys to then come in and do some of the work that they need to be done. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Yes? All right.
I could give a few more words about the military. It was with Ergotech and Danelle that we did a lot of work in the military, and they are very conscious of their need to get things right. And I remember I told you about little Lena. The big thing was to work with the weight of their backpacks. And should it just be standard 50 kgs for everybody, or should it be relative to the recruit's size? So that was something we did, and we also did dehydration, absolutely horrendous, and the need to rehydrate on a regular basis when they're marching miles, carrying loads in a stinking heat. So, and that is all from Ergotech. And quite frankly, we got quite a lot of our equipment. We never made money here, but we got quite a bit of our equipment in this department is from Ergotech. So they were very aware of it.
I don't want to add to the military conversation, unless someone else wants to add to the military conversation. I just want to pick up your second question, which was, does this university understand what we do? No. That's not an unfair statement. Look at my HOD. No, I don't think they fully understand, and the reason for that is I think we probably need to look at ourselves there. I think we are by nature a humble department. I don't think we blow our trumpets. I don't think that we push as much as perhaps we should what we do. But I do think that this event and this celebration will do the work for us. But I certainly do think that it is changing. I guess it's a call to our staff, my colleagues, and to our students to be a little bit more proud of what we do and be a little bit more willing to share what we do, and like John and everyone else has said, show our value, because I do think we have value across many different spaces, not necessarily just related to office workspaces, which is sometimes what our department is relinquished to. Just come and help me with an office ergonomics assessment. We can offer a lot more than that, but I think we need to do the work ourselves there.
So we had Belinda Nomji sitting in the audience before the break. She unfortunately had to shoot off. She's the university's health and safety officer, and she has very similar concerns about, her role in the university as a health and safety officer and not being taken seriously, or health and safety and people's safety and well-being in the university not being taken seriously. The good news is she has now come abroad and is participating in our ergonomics short courses. And after we've got a series of 5 ergonomics short courses that are aimed at practitioners, she's almost completed the first one and is so enthused by just being given a different lens at which to look at health and safety in our space, that she has now signed up for the second one. And we've already been talking about, just putting our forces together and making the university realize that, we are actually quite value adding Yeah. But this gent over here had to wait for a while now. Sorry, where's that microphone? Thanks. Sorry to make you wait.
No
okay,
problem,
thanks.
no problem.
Please introduce yourself because you are an unfamiliar face in these circles.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay.
Colleagues, I'm Tamari Nkwebi, and I come from Sulu Sport Management. It's a very interesting small project. But firstly, it is an honor to be invited again by this department because I came into this department accidentally because the university has sent me to do a benchmarking task to try and align our sport program with other universities because we're far behind. And this program, while I'm sitting here, it's a good thing to not ask questions at times because you get to really listen and actually sponge all the answers to the questions I'm asked, and you actually get to find the entire concept of what to actually go back and actually deliver when you go back. So this is an incredible one. I think I'm more luckier than anyone else in this house. Anyway, so the gentleman over there actually covered a lot of what in fact, it goes, Andrew, it goes back to the questions we had on the benchmarking program, that what is more important now is actually pushing out the identity of our programs out there to be famous enough for people to utilize them. Because when we listen here as staff, I'm a lecturer, and there's a lot of questions that students get to ask me, and I still battle to answer those questions. And when I come to this platform, I get to realize, linking the dots from the international space to universities at the first world level, and universities at the baseline and the developing ground, and to try and sync the link, it just gets us into another level. But what I wanted to ask the panelists is on, or maybe rather to suggest that we need to find a way to make the terms that are in the forefront of our programs famous. HFE, Ergonomics, these terms are totally foreign to the rest of us. And we need to get to know this because this is what the people need out there. The second part is, I want to understand the industries of target. I think the gentleman over there wants to get to that question and tie it up. Most of us here are probably never gonna go internationally. I'm not saying we must not be ambitious enough. We are gonna go there. But some of us want to work locally. Is there a way we can target the local environments? When I was here, Andrew was talking about schools around, hospitals. I actually went to one of the hospital over here and realized how great the work is done from here, linked to that space, in administration and a lot of other things that you guys do. So I think there should be more of a broader approach to help these guys get to that space, more than just military and great spaces, but there's local spaces that actually plant a lot of money into the space. I started a project 4 years ago where, well, I'm a sports scientist, so my background is a little bit different. When I got into that space, we started monetizing exercise medicine. We went away from sport, but went into exercise medicine. Now, a lot of people during COVID, when they could not go into gyms, they went into that concept and it just went viral. And a lot of people are now going into that space. So there is a massive opportunity that we can go into. So I must not extend any further, but I just want to understand the industries of target so that I can take that as a take home. Thank you so much.
Does anybody want to comment on that? Andrew. Thank you.
I mean, that's always a difficult one. I was actually going to tackle the other question which you had, which is around what we call it. But they're in some ways tied to one another. So each country has their own primary industries. So a lot of it is driven, the way in which human factors and ergonomics is driven in different countries is driven by what are the prominent industries in those countries. So for example, China at the moment, AI. Human factors in AI is huge. I went to a conference there in October last year. 1,700 people there. They started advertising the conference in September. And at the end of October, they had 1,700 people appearing. So it is about finding the industries. The problem with South Africa is that we are already quite saturated in those industries which are quite big, which is partly the military, also mining, a lot of human factors and ergonomics in the mining, not as much as they could be. But there's quite a lot of space in that way, and not the ones which are where it's actually needed. Where it's really needed in South Africa are in places like the informal sector. No money. You're not going to make any money working in the informal sector. Healthcare, again, apart from very small kind of areas like maybe in sleep and things like that. But these are areas where we actually really need to be making a contribution, but you're not going to make yourself rich working in those areas. Back to your other question a bit earlier about so things like human-computer interaction, usability experience, UX, human systems interactions. These are all terms which actually come out of ergonomics. They weren't invented outside of ergonomics. They were invented inside ergonomics and have then taken on a life of their own. What hasn't taken on a life of their own, but I mean, part of the problem is in the world now, UX people, maybe 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 people call themselves UX designers. 20,000 people in the world call themselves ergonomists. So we've kind of like sort of spurred off these various different other types of disciplines which have been more successful in terms of recruiting people to them than the actual mother discipline, which is ergonomics. So I don't know how to solve that problem. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, last comment, and then we need to wrap up.
All right. I think your question in terms of which industry to target depends on what you want. If you want easy access in terms of going in to do the work, go to the ones where the regulators are big on ergonomics, because you don't have to have conversations about what is ergonomics, why do you need to do it. The legislation does the initial talking for you, so it makes it easier to have those deeper conversations about how to move the needle forward. If you want to go into industries where you're going to establish your own niche area, literally anywhere else you can go. So which industries I have seen typically are easier to get into? Transport, particularly maritime, rail, big aviation. They know what ergonomics and human factors is because it's legislated. You can go into, obviously manufacturing is also very big, especially companies that are multinational. They will have been told by their mother companies in Europe or wherever it is that they need to do ergonomics, and so it's already in their vocab and they understand what it is, so it's easier to have those conversations. But I think I agree with Thatcher that there's a lot of other industries where the legislation is not being punted, there isn't money, and that's where we also need to be able to go into for the greater good. But if you have other agendas, then you go to the other side.
Thank you. Guys, it's been a very, very good afternoon. I mean, again, I think we're all a bit flabbergasted and probably a bit cognitively fatigued at this stage. Thank you to our panelists. There were questions, but unfortunately, you will just have to ask those somewhere in the passage as you bump into one of these individuals here. I'm going to hand back over to Spantje to do the closing. Okay.
John knows the exception, but in quite some terms he has come from far, but in relative terms he hasn't. But the other four people sitting here have come from Joburg, Durban and Cape Town. As you can hear, some people, not Thatcher, because he works like we do in sheltered employment. Prof is retired, but the other two are self-employed, which means they're sitting here not earning money.
No.
Okay, we definitely need to learn from him how he gets that right. But the department for the four of you has just made a little something. It's not amazing, but it is amazing. No, it's not a toilet roll. Just something to remember today and the 80th. And Maria has put these together for us. And if you've seen the art in the foyer, she did all of that. It's amazing. And she has arted some glasses for you guys. So Pat, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate it.
I've got to have a last word. I am so proud of everyone. It was amazing to come back. Thank you.
Sma. Siyabonga, Sma. Thank you so much. Andrew? Thank you very much.
Thanks, young man.
Good doctor. Thank you.
Thanks.
Andrew, I want to ask Jono.
Yeah.
He's told us what he does part-time. What does he do full-time?
Do you really want that? Okay. So you mean part-time as in I play golf? No.
A real job. You play golf.
Yeah. No, so I'm a management consultant, but I work 100% remote, so I actually wasn't joking. So I get messages from my teams, and I'm basically guiding my teams as we go, right? So as Jono said, I work on a 24/7 cycle. I've got 5 projects that I typically manage at any one time, and I've got a little pod team. So you were asking what you can do. You can monetize your time in many different ways, and you can work across industries. So I work across mining, tech, I work across UX, as the Thatch knows. So I've just picked 5 or 6 different projects, and that's what I do. And I stay offline.
Just last thing from me. Third years I owe you one because I haven't invited you to the cocktail function because I didn't have enough money. I haven't learned to monetize like Jono does. That's John, so I will learn from him, but I do owe you one. Yes. We'll have to negotiate that on Tuesday next week as to what I owe you, yes? But to the staff and the postgrads, please join us that side. And sell like hell what we do to the hierarchy that are there tonight. Yeah.
Okay, and before you all leave, part 2 comes tomorrow at Candace's inaugural. I wrote it out. It is 6:30 in Eden Grove Lecture Venue for the title From Playgrounds to Performance, Advancing Physical Activity, Youth Sport and Health, and Elite Sport in South Africa and beyond. So that's when we do part 2 of this symposium. Have a good evening. Yes. Thanks for the... Thank you so much. Thank you. And sorry that somebody permanently jumped into the I can't but yeah, but it's okay. There are 2 cameras.
Siyapheka okanye siyathini?
Yeah, siyapheka. Siyapheka. Azawuyazi. Mhlawumbe ndinjengalo manje. Andizamama ndiyafika mna.
Always go sitting.